Welcome to our YouTube channel. Hi guys, tonight we sail into the cold, salt-bitten world of medieval pirates. The sea is black as ink, the air sharp enough to slice through wool, and the waves beat against the hull like fists demanding tribute. You can almost smell the tar, the fish oil, the sweat of men who haven't felt a warm hearth in months. Out here, food is not a luxury, it's a daily prayer whispered to an indifferent sea. And you, standing on this frost-rimmed deck, might be surprised how quickly the stomach forgets the taste of comfort. You probably wouldn't survive this, most of us wouldn't. But the pirates who did, those strange cunning, half-wit starved wolves of the sea, learned a kind of patience that feels alien now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and listen to the ship groan around you. The North Sea in winter is a gray, endless thing. The horizon vanishes into mist and the cold seeps into your bones until you stop noticing it. The deck planks creak beneath your boots, stiff with frost. You move slower. Now everyone does, the men around you Gaelic, Breton, Moorish or English share one look, eyes dulled by hunger. Supplies are low, the barrels half empty and the salted pork has begun to smell like death itself. The wind cuts across your face as you haul a line wondering what's left to eat. The ship's master, a wiry man with a beard frozen into points, mutters something about conserving rations. The word ration has a bitter taste. You've been counting crumbs, scraping barrels and trading insults that sound too tired to sting. A fact historians often point out is that pirates were not the wild, careless eaters of legend. They planned, calculated and hoarded food with military precision. Every biscuit, every salted fish was tallied and stored. But the ocean had its own plans. Leaks ruined flour, salt turned to damp stone and meat, no matter how well packed, eventually rotted. One night, when the moon glows through ragged clouds, you find yourself sitting beside the galley hatch listening to the cook curse under his breath. The pot boils weakly. The smell rising from it is uncertain. A stew, maybe, or a punishment. He lifts the lid, pokes the contents and mutters, "Still better than snow." You think of home, bread fresh from the oven, a mug of ale that doesn't taste of iron. But home feels like a story someone told you once and forgot to finish. The only warmth here is in the memory. By dawn, frost has painted every rope white. The sea is calm now, unnervingly so, like it's waiting. You climb to the foil looking over the stillness. Hunger does strange things to men. You've seen a deckhand lick ice from the mast to soothe his throat. You've seen another chew on a strip of old leather, pretending it's dried beef. The ocean whispers under the hull a cold lullaby. The historian in your head, if you can still think like that, reminds you that food was not just sustenance for pirates. It was power captains who fed their crew well-earned loyalty. Those who failed risked mutiny. The sea didn't forgive weakness, and neither did men. Some scholars still debate how organized these floating communities really were. Were they anarchic mobs of thieves or disciplined navies bound by necessity? The truth probably floats somewhere in between. You look at the faces around you, sunken eyes, cracked lips, hands trembling from cold, and realize that survival has its own kind of order. You scrape your bowl clean, though there's hardly a spoonful left. The cook ladles something that might once have been peas, now gray-green mush. He sighs. "We'll be at it till we're bones." You nod, too tired to answer. The taste is bland, but at least it's warm. The captain paces the deck, boots things softly. His breath fogs the air. He's thinking, always thinking, how to stretch what's left, how to hunt, how to steal. You can almost hear the plans grinding in his head. Somewhere beyond the ice there are merchant ships loaded with grain and salt beef. Somewhere warmth still exists. You remember stories of warmer days, of rum and roasted fish on sunlit decks. Now the sky is the color of old iron and every exhale feels like surrender. You pull your cloak tighter, trying not to think of the ignoring in your stomach. The sea stretches endless and uncaring. Before you, a crewman nearby hums softly a tune so old it might predate the language you speak. It's a lullaby from his homeland, something about hearth, fires, and bread. You close your eyes just for a moment and almost taste it, the sweetness of barley, the comfort of full bellies. Then a wave slaps against the hull and reality pulls you back. Your fingers are numb. Your lips crack when you smile, though you're not sure why you're smiling, perhaps because in some strange way this misery feels shared. You are part of something, a frozen brotherhood of need, and in that there's a strange peace. The day drags on. The sun never really rises, only glows weakly. Behind cloud and mist you catch a glimpse of gulls circling far off, too distant to mean land. Someone mutters that gulls always find the dying ships first. Someone else laughs, though it's not funny. When night falls again, the cook calls for dinner, though no one bothers to move quickly. The smell is the same, boiled salt pork and hardtack softened in water. It's barely food. But you eat it carefully, reverently, as though this tasteless stew holds a promise. The historian's voice in your mind whispers that for many of these men, food was the only connection to sanity. Meals, no matter how grim anchored the day, gave rhythm to survival. Even now, centuries later, archaeologists find fragments of pottery, wishbones, grains of barley and shipwrecks, tiny ghosts of meals that once kept men alive. And as you lie back on the deck, wrapped in a damp blanket that smells of smoke and brine, you think of all those forgotten meals. You wonder how many times this same sky has watched the same hunger. Somewhere in the dark, the captain murmurs a prayer not to God but to the sea. You listen half asleep, the cold numbing everything but the slow beat of your heart. You drift between dreams of firelight and the sound of distant waves. The ship cars, the wind hums and hunger curls beside you like a quiet companion. The frost thickens overnight, turning the deck into a sheet of glass. You wake with salt stiff in your hair and the smell of smoke lingering in the air. Somewhere below, the cook is already at work, coaxing life from the last of the fuel. You follow the thin trail of warmth down the ladder boots, slipping on icy steps and feel the ship sway under your weight like a living thing trying to shake off its dreams. Salt, smoke and desperation are your morning companions. Every scent in the galley tells a story of preservation of humans wrestling time. You can almost see it in the barrels lined against the wall, packed with salted fish, slabs of beef and pale cakes of lard. Each one a small victory against decay, but none of them immune. The air itself is damp, and salt that was meant to preserve slowly draws in moisture, turning slick, then useless. You sit on an upturned crate as the cook stirs something that might once have been meat. He glances over and grins, the kind of grin that hides defeat. If it doesn't kill us, he says, it'll keep us chewing. You laugh softly, though your stomach knots at the smell. Preserving food at sea was an art form. The pirates borrowed tricks from merchants and navies alike. Meat was packed in brine so strong it could burn your tongue, and fish smoked until it turned black. The result was food that could survive months in the hold if not taste good while doing it. You take a bite of the hard salty strip he offers, and it feels like chewing wood soaked in seawater. Still, you swallow. Historians often note that salt was the most valuable commodity aboard these ships, more prized than gold. In winter, without it, survival was a race against rot. Some captains paid handsomely for the purest salt from Iberian mines, while others scraped together whatever they could find, even from evaporated seawater that left a bitter aftertaste. The sea has its own cruel humor. Sometimes barrels burst open in storms, flooding the stores and ruining everything. Then came the smoke. Men would build small fires on deck under iron pans, drying strips of meat and fish, until the air filled with a haze that clung to every breath. The smoke seeped into clothes, hair, even dreams. You watched the cook rub his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving streaks of soot. Better smoked than spoiled, he mutters, tossing a handful of coarse salt into the pot. The sound is sharp, like hail hitting tin. The smell is worse, but at least it is warm. One curious fact from surviving ship logs: some pirates seasoned their rations with gunpowder when spices ran out. It sounds absurd, but traces of potassium nitrate in gunpowder gave a faint tang, a little spark of flavor in a meal that otherwise tasted like damp rope. You imagine the taste and almost laugh, thinking how hunger turns men into strange experimenters. There is still debate among historians whether pirates used saltpeter as a preservative or simply as a dare among the desperate. The records are fragmentary, the stories half-believed. Yet you can picture it, can't you? A group of shivering sailors daring one another to season their supper with something meant to explode. You chew another mouthful, trying to ignore the sting of salt on your cracked lips. The cook hums softly a tune from the coasts of Brittany, and for a moment the galley feels less like a coffin and more like a hearth. Smoke curls around you, soft and familiar, as if it's wrapping you in something close to comfort. Above deck, the wind howls through the rigging. You climb up after eating, the gray sky pressing low. The cold feels sharper now that you've warmed slightly. On the main deck, men are hauling barrels, inspecting ropes, pretending not to think of food. The sea has gone a dull green thick with ice drift. Somewhere out there a gull cries and the sound cuts through the silence like a knife. You glance toward the horizon and think about how much the human body can endure. The pirates of the north, the frozen Baltic, the English Channel, they all shared one truth: hunger was the hardest enemy. You can fight storms, outwit navies, even cheat the hangman, but hunger never lets go. It creeps into your bones, wears away at your mind, until even the taste of salt becomes a kind of comfort. There is a superstition whispered among the older sailors. They say the sea watches those who waste food. Spill a grain of salt, toss a bone overboard without respect, and the ocean remembers. You don't mock that kind of belief out here. You tip your bowl into the sea, carefully, whispering something you don't quite believe in, just in case. The smoke still clings to your clothes, your fingers smell of brine. You rub them together and watch the flakes of salt glint like frost in the gray light. Somewhere below, the cook begins to sing again, a low, rough voice that echoes off the timbers. You close your eyes for a moment, letting it lull you, and realize that salt and smoke are not just the tools of survival. They are the taste of the age itself. The wind shifts. You hear the sails strain, ropes groaning under tension. The ship moves with new purpose, as though the sea has finally remembered your existence. Ahead, the horizon blurs into something darker, maybe a storm, maybe a promise. You take a deep breath and the air tastes of iron, salt, and distant land. As you stand there, you think of how every bite taken aboard this ship is a kind of rebellion. Every salted scrap, every smoky mouthful defies the sea's attempt to claim you. And though your belly aches and your fingers tremble, there is pride in that defiance. Night will come soon. The fires will burn again, and the same bitter smell will rise from the galley. But for now you face the wind and let the salt sting your lips, feeling for just a moment alive. The morning comes, quiet but cruel. The cold presses into your skin as you wake to the creak of the hull and the low groan of ropes under strain. The sea is still a vast mirror of gray that reflects nothing back. Hunger in your belly, and already you dread what will be served. Someone mentions the word heart attack, and the sound alone makes your jaw ache. Heart attack. The infamous ship's biscuit lies stacked in canvas bags near the galley. They are not really bread anymore, not after months at sea, more like slabs of baked stone, pale and chipped, stamped with holes to keep them from rising. The cook calls them tooth testers. You pick one up, tap it against the table, and it rings like wood. It smells faintly of dust and salt. Records from English and Dutch ships describe these biscuits as lasting years if kept dry. They were cheap, sturdy, and utterly joyless. Made from flour, water, and sometimes a trace of salt. They were baked twice until every drop of moisture was gone. It made them immortal, yes, but also barely edible. You take a bite and feel the edges scrape your gums. To soften it, the cook advises soaking the biscuit in ale or seawater. You choose ale. It turns the bread to mush, though it still tastes faintly of mold. Men used to joke that hard AC was both food and a weapon, depending on how you threw it. You imagine a deck full of hungry sailors tossing biscuits at rats, laughing through cracked lips. Oddly enough, a few ship journals describe how sailors carve names or symbols into their biscuits, turning them into small charms before eating. Perhaps it was a way of claiming ownership in a world where nothing belonged to you, or maybe it helped them forget what they were actually chewing. You take another mouthful and try not to think about the worms. Yes, worms. They come with the flour or crawl in later when moisture sneaks through the seams. The men call them weevils, though they are really beetle larvae. They wriggle in the dim light. When you split open a biscuit, tiny pale bodies twisting before you crush them with your thumb. Some sailors used to joke that they were just extra protein, others pretended not to see. A curious note found in a Spanish navigator's log tells how some crews tapped the biscuit against the table to shake the insects out before eating. The sound of hundreds of men knocking their food on the wood became part of the rhythm of life at sea, like the hum of wind or the crack of rope. Tap, 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 then silence as each man chewed. Experts remain divided on whether hardtack was truly tolerable for long voyages or merely the lesser of evils. Some maritime historians claim the flour was sometimes mixed with ground peas or beans to improve flavor, while others insist it only hastened spoilage. You picture the argument, one scholar defending pea flour, another shaking his head over moldy crumbs. Either way, the biscuit remained the same cruel staple that defined centuries of sailing life. The cook sits down beside you now, his fingers red from the cold. He grins, showing a gap where a tooth used to be. Lost it to a biscuit, he says, and you cannot tell if he is joking, maybe both. He dips his own piece into the pot of weak broth and eats without complaint. You do the same, letting the warmth trickle down your throat, dull and tasteless. It is said that even pirates who lived outside the laws of nations respected one rule: never waste food. Every crumb was earned, even if it was crawling, even if it tasted like rope. You ate it because tomorrow there might be nothing. Later, when the sun struggles to break through the clouds, you join the others on deck. The air bites your face, the ropes are crusted with frost and gulls follow the ship like pale ghosts. One of the younger sailors jokes about how the gulls probably eat better than you. Nobody laughs. This time you take a moment to look at the horizon. It is not food you crave anymore, but texture, flavor, the feel of something alive. The sea offers nothing but cold air and memory. You wonder how many men before you bit into the same hard biscuit and thought the same thought. This is what survival tastes like. Somewhere deep in the hold, rats scurry. The men pretend not to notice, but they know what will happen soon. When rations run low, the rats become both enemy and meal. The line between disgust and necessity blurs fast at sea. You glance toward the hatch and shiver. A strange entry in a Danish captain's journal describes a winter when the crew mixed powdered biscuit with seawater and whale blubber to make a kind of paste. They called it sailor's pudding. The description alone makes your stomach tighten, but the captain wrote that it kept the men walking. That was enough. You feel the ship roll gently, the icy water lapping against the hull. The sound is steady, like breathing. You chew another bite of biscuit, more out of habit than hunger, and let the rhythm of the sea swallow the noise. For a moment it almost feels peaceful. The cold wind whistles through the rigging again. You pull your coat tighter, crumbs falling into the folds of wool. The sea stretches endlessly before you, gray and wide, and somewhere beneath that surface lies the promise of warmer days. You glance at the bag of biscuits still full and feel a strange gratitude. They are miserable, yes, but they exist. And in a world where the difference between life and death is one meal too few, even misery can be mercy. The sea moans like a living thing. Tonight, You sit near the galley fire, such as it is, watching thin flames lick the edges of a blackened pot. The air smells faintly of yeast, sweat and smoke. Around you, men clutch their cups as though warmth itself might slip away if they loosened their grip. The cook hums under his breath, stirring a strange brew that bubbles softly in the half-dark. What he is making isn't ale, not exactly. It is something weaker, rougher, a fermented mixture of water, barley scraps and whatever sweetness could be scavenged from the stores. Weak beer, they call it. It keeps the thirst down and the sickness away, at least for a while. Chroniclers of the age often mentioned how medieval sailors trusted weak beer more than water, believing it cleaner, safer, almost medicinal. They were not wrong. Fresh water went foul within days, but alcohol, even in tiny amounts, kept it from rotting. You take a sip from your cup and taste the sour tang. It burns just a little on the way down, but in this cold even bitterness feels like luxury. A few men laugh softly as the warmth reaches them. The youngest sailor wipes his mouth and sigh, if it had more kick, maybe I'd forget how cold I am. The cook answers with a snort. You'd forget how to stand too. Still, the beer is precious. It carries morale more than nutrition, and the men know it. Sometimes, when grain ran short, brews were made from pine needles or dried herbs soaked in hot water. One peculiar record from a Hanseatic merchant ship mentions a sea tea brewed with lemon peel and garlic. The crew swore it kept the chill from reaching their bones. Some researchers question if these strange brews actually prevented illness or if they simply gave men something to believe in. Faith in the cup, perhaps more than chemistry. Yet belief alone could sustain you through a night like this. The cook ladles stew into rough bowls. Each portion the same murky gray. The smell is thick with salt and boiled fat. You dip your spoon watching the pale chunks drift through the surface. Maybe fish, maybe pork, maybe both. The line between meat and memory has blurred. You lift it to your lips anyway. It tastes of smoke and sea. According to several old ship diaries, galley stews were never the same. Twice they were the sum of what survived: onions gone, soft dried peas, bits of biscuit crumbled for thickening in desperate times, even sawdust found its way into the pot. The cook called it sea flour. You swallow carefully, hoping this isn't one of those nights. One strange detail mentioned in a privateer's journal tells of a winter when the men mixed whale oil into their soup for richness. The result was revolting but filling. He wrote that the smell haunted the crew for months, yet none left a drop uneaten. You imagine the stench, the slick sheen across the surface, the reluctant gratitude that followed. You sip again. The stew warms your stomach, slow and steady, like a small fire spreading through frozen wood around you. The voices soften. Someone hums a lullaby in a language you do not recognize. It drifts through the air like smoke. No one speaks of hunger here, not directly. They talk around it instead with humor or memory. One man recalls a feast from years ago, his mother's bread heavy with butter. Another describes oranges so bright they seem to glow. You listen quietly, letting the pictures replace the taste in your mouth. An old sailor near the door taps his spoon against the bowl and begins to tell a story. He says there was once a captain who brewed beer so strong it could catch fire. He used it to light the ship's lanterns when oil ran out. You laugh, though you suspect it's a myth. Still in the dim light, every man is smiling at the image of flames born from drink. Academic circles continue to discuss whether pirates carried their own brewing tools or relied entirely on captured supplies. Some evidence suggests small fermentation barrels were kept even on fast-moving vessels. If that is true, it means that brewing, like music or prayer, was part of the rhythm of survival, something steady to count the days by. You stare into your cup. The fire light dances on the surface. Golden in the gloom, it reminds you of home, though you cannot remember which home anymore. The cold has taken that too. Outside the storm begins again. Wind howls across the deck, rattling the shutters. Someone tightens the ropes, holding the galley door. The cook just shrugs and mutters, "Let it scream, it can't come in." You smile at that. A faint spark of warmth that has nothing to do with food. The stew pot is empty now. Men scrape their bowls, licking the last traces from the sides. The sound is quiet, respectful. When you've gone this long without plenty, even scraps feel sacred. The cook wipes his hands and sigh, "That's it for tonight." He pauses, glancing around the room. Dream of roast chicken, if you must, it costs nothing. You stand and stretch joints stiff from the cold. The weak beer sloshes in your belly, softening the edges of the world. The ship tilts slightly, rocking you toward the stairs above. The wind whistles through the rigging again. You climb slowly, cup in hand, careful not to spill what warmth remains. When you reach the deck, the world is pure gray. The sea glows faintly in the moonlight, broken only by thin lines of white foam. You sip the last of the beer and close your eyes. The taste is faint, now almost gone, but it lingers like memory, bitter, smoky, alive. For a moment, the cold recedes. You breathe out, watching your breath drift away like fog, and feel impossibly a little less alone. By dawn the storm has passed, leaving the deck slick with ice and silence. The air is so clear it hurts to breathe. You step out, boots crunching over frozen ropes, and smell the faint tang of the sea, briny, cold and almost metallic. Somewhere below, the cook is counting what remains, a few sacks of peas, a dwindling barrel of salt pork, and not much else. Hunger waits quietly in the corners, patient and confident. Today, the captain sends a small party to shore. The ice is thick enough to carry weight, and somewhere along that white horizon there might be food. You volunteer without thinking, driven by the dull ache in your belly. The landing boat groans as it is lowered, and the men climb in, clutching spears, nets and crude hooks. The sea slaps gently against the hull. Each sound a reminder of distance. The coastline ahead is sharp, with rocks and snow, your breath clouds before you as you drag the boat over shallow ice. Every sound carries the squeal of yes against frost, the crunch of boots, the whisper of wind across empty land. The world feels hollow here. Contemporary letters from coastal settlements mention seeing such groups in winter, ragged men combing the shores for crabs, kelp or the remains of wrecks. They were not always identified as pirates, sometimes as lost sailors, sometimes as starving fishermen, but their hunger gave them away. You can imagine how it must have looked, a handful of men, wild-eyed and desperate, picking through tide pools like scavengers. You crouch near the water line, prying at a rock until it yields a small crab, slow and pale from the cold. Furthermore, you hesitate, then toss it into the basket. The man beside you finds a cluster of mussels, their shells chipped and dull. "Boil them," he says, "boil everything." Oddly enough, old Norwegian records tell of pirates surviving winters almost entirely on seaweed. They learned to dry it, pound it and boil it into broth. At first, locals mocked them, then copied them when the snows grew too long. It turns out, the sea, stingy as it is, offers just enough to live on if you are humble enough to take what it gives. The ice cracks faintly under your boots. You move carefully, searching between rocks. The tide is low and the exposed pools shimmer with trapped life, tiny fish, limmets and snails clinging to stone. You gather what you can, numb fingers fumbling. The smell of salt and decay fills the air. But after weeks of bland stew, even that feels like hope. There is still no clear agreement about how often pirates relied on foraging during winter voyages. Some maritime historians claim these expeditions were rare and risky, while others insist they were essential for survival. When trade routes froze, the truth likely shifts with each coastline, each storm, each hungry crew. You find a gull's egg cracked open on the rocks, frozen solid. You slip it into your pouch anyway. Behind you, one of the men shouts he has spotted something glinting under the ice, a stranded fish trapped when the tide fell together. You chip it free, laughing through chattering teeth. It is small and stiff, but still a miracle. By midday the baskets are half full. The sun hangs low and pale. The group gathers driftwood for a fire, though most of it is soaked. Smoke rises in thin, reluctant trails. Someone jokes that it smells like victory. The cook who came along despite his age squats by the flames, boiling seawater with the shells and fish inside. The smell is strong and sharp. One curious note from a monk's diary in Flanders describes meeting shipwrecked sailors who made soup from boiled seaweed and bird bones. He wrote that it tasted of salt and mercy. You taste the same now, holding the rough bowl to your lips. As the steam curls into your face, the broth burns your tongue, but you drink greedily, swallowing sea and smoke together. When the pot is empty, everyone sits quietly, no one speaks. For a while. The cold feels softer now, the hunger less cruel. You watch the snow drift across the rocks and think how strange it is that survival can taste so raw, so pure. As the boat pushes off again, you glance back at the shore. It looks almost peaceful, like a place untouched by time. But you know better. Every inch of that coastline remembers the desperate hands that scraped at its stones looking for life. Back on board, the men carry the catch. Below deck, the cook sorts it, muttering to himself, already planning tomorrow's meal. The captain watches from above, his face unreadable. He knows this small harvest buys only a little time. Still, time is something. The wind rises again, curling through the rigging like a voice. You pull your cloak tight and lean against the rail. The sky is beginning to darken, sure with violet and silver. Somewhere out there, beyond the ice, spring is waiting. But for now the sea holds you in its frozen grip, and all you can do is breathe and wait and trust that tomorrow will bring something more. To eat. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of the waves lull your thoughts. The taste of the sea lingers on your tongue, both bitter and comforting. Hunger is still there, but for tonight it sleeps. The next morning begins with the hush of snow falling onto canvas sails. The ship rocks lazily in the slow current. Half frozen, half free, you stand near the railing, your breath curling into mist. The world feels still, like it's holding its breath. Then, far off, a sharp sound cracks across the air. The lookout points to the horizon, a wreck. You follow the captain's gaze and see it too, the pale ribs of a broken vessel jutting through the ice. Even from here you can tell it has been there for weeks, maybe longer. The wood is splintered, sails shredded, the figurehead gone, but the promise of food draws every eye on deck. By midday a small boat is lowered again, the sea sighs beneath it, dark water lapping against the sides. You pull your cloak tighter as the crew rows through floating shards of ice. Each one glitters in the weak sunlight like glass. When you reach the wreck, the smell hits first, old wood brine and something darker like spoiled grain. You climb aboard carefully, boots slipping on the frozen planks. The wreck groans underfoot in the hold. Barrels are scattered like dice. Some burst open, spilling pale dust across the floor. You kneel and scoop a handful between your fingers. Flour, damp and clumped, but still recognizable. Maritime records from the 14th century describe how scavenging from wrecks was both common and dangerous. To take goods from a stranded ship was to risk the wrath of local lords. Yet hunger cared little for laws. Many pirate crews survived entire winters by raiding the remains of merchant vessels that never reached port. You pry open another barrel. The smell makes your stomach twist. Saltish gone, slick with rot, flies even in this cold buzz faintly around the edges. You gag but keep searching. Hunger is patient but not polite. One sailor nearby calls out he has found a crate of lemons, dried and shriveled but whole. You laugh almost disbelieving. The sharp scent cuts through the stench like sunlight. You bite one out of curiosity and flinch at the sourness. Yet your body seems to crave it instinctively. Later generations would learn that citrus guarded against scurvy, but here, in this frozen ruin, it is simply a miracle that something fresh still exists. A peculiar entry in an old ship's log mentions a similar find, a cargo of oranges from Spain that washed ashore months after a storm. The sailors who found them wept as they ate, though the fruit was half rotten. You imagine that scene now and understand completely. As you move deeper into the wreck you find another surprise, a sealed jar of honey, thick and dark but still edible. The cook opens it with reverence, dipping a fingertip to taste. He closes his eyes, silent for a moment, then he nods, "It's good." The men pass it around carefully, each taking the smallest taste. The sweetness feels unreal. Too soft, too alive for this place. Experts on maritime life suggest that honey was prized as both food and medicine aboard medieval ships. It preserved indefinitely, provided energy and disguised the taste of spoiled rations. You can see why for a few moments the men seem almost human again, smiling, whispering, remembering sweetness. Then, at the back of the hold, you find a barrel sealed with pitch. The captain helps crack it open. Inside are slabs of cured pork, darkened but still solid. The smell is strong, yet not unbearable. The cook tests a piece, nods slowly. "We can make this last." The relief that sweeps through the crew is almost holy. There remains uncertainty among historians about how much of pirate life was scavenged versus stolen outright. Some evidence suggests a complex code among crews. Wrecks found adrift were fair claim, while raiding a survivor's ship was condemned. But at sea morality bends with the wind. Tonight no one asks where this food came from. As you row back toward your ship, the light fades. The sky glows faint pink along the horizon, the water turning black beneath it. The wreck grows smaller. Behind you, a ghost returning to its grave. You cannot help but feel a strange gratitude toward the dead sailors who once owned those supplies. Their misfortune is your breath. Back aboard, the cook begins sorting the finds. The honey goes into a small jar, the pork into the salt barrel. The lemons are hung near the galley fire, drying slowly. You stand nearby watching him hum softly a tune that sounds older than any map. That night the meal feels almost festive. The stew has real flavor again, faint but present. Someone tells a story about another wreck they once found filled with spices from the east, pepper cloves, cinnamon treasures worth more than silver. You imagine the smell, sharp and warm, mingling with the cold sea air. The wind outside howls, but it no longer feels like an enemy. The fire crackles softly. The sweetness of honey still lingers on your tongue. You think about how every bite of food out here is borrowed from someone or something that did not survive. It's a grim truth, yet in its way it feels sacred. Before you sleep, you glance out at the black horizon. Somewhere beyond it, more wrecks drift, more ghosts waiting in the deep. You whisper a quiet thanks, not sure to whom, and close your eyes. The ship rocks gently, carrying you into dreams that smell faintly of salt and smoke and honey. Morning breaks soft and gray. The frost has thinned, and a faint drizzle falls from the clouds turning the deck slick and shining. You can smell smoke drifting up from the galley again, but this time it mingles with something unfamiliar, spice maybe, or hope. The cook is stirring the pot with new care, as if afraid to wake the ghosts of the wrecked ship that gave you this food. The captain leans on the rail, his eyes fixed on the shore in the distance. A village lies beyond those hills, its chimneys faintly smoking in the mist. You know what he is thinking, food trade, maybe even warmth, but the villagers will not welcome you with open arms. Pirates and traders share a language only when hunger forces it. The crew gathers whispering. One man suggests going ashore at night, another argues for daylight, when the villagers are less likely to panic. The debate swells until the captain lifts his hand. "We'll trade, not raid," he says. "If they give, we take with thanks, if not, we go hungry." The silence that follows is heavy, but no one disagrees. Contemporary accounts from coastal communities along the North Sea describe these uneasy exchanges, fishermen meeting seafarers whose faces they did not recognize, trading flour for rum, bread for salt, or dried fish for nails and cloth. Sometimes it ended with smiles, sometimes with knives. Hunger has its own diplomacy. You row ashore with a few others, the boat cutting through cold water that reflects the gray sky. The village appears slowly built from stone and driftwood, smoke curling from its roofs, dogs bark as you approach. A man with a spear steps forward, suspicion carved into his face. The captain raises both hands and speaks gently, his voice calm and low. "We have goods to trade," he says, "salt, rope, a little cloth." The villagers watch. Then an older woman steps out from behind them, wiping her hands on her apron. She studies your faces, sees the hunger there and nods. Once inside her cottage the air is warm and smells of baking bread. You can hardly stand it. The sight of loaves rising by the fire makes your chest tighten. She sets one on the table, then points at the bundle you carry. The captain opens it, revealing a small jar of honey and a strip of cured pork from the wreck. Her eyes widen. "Honey is worth gold here." She nods again, slower this time, and gestures to the bread. The exchange is silent but understood. She cuts the loaf, steam curling upward, and divides it into pieces. The crust crackles, the inside soft as clouds. When you take a bite it feels unreal. The warmth spreads through you thick and heavy. Old chronicles from northern France mention how some villagers quietly traded with sea raiders in winter, choosing survival over loyalty to any crown. They risked punishment for treason, but hunger silenced politics. Perhaps this woman has made such bargains before. One curious story from a Breton fishing town tells of a pirate who traded his pistol for a sack of turnips and a wool blanket. The villagers later displayed the weapon as proof that mercy was worth more than steel. No one knows what became of the man, but the tale survived centuries as a parable of quiet humanity. You sit in the corner chewing slowly. The bread sticks to your teeth and it tastes divine. The cook murmurs something about how he could live forever if he had an oven like this. The woman smiles faintly, maybe amused, maybe sad. She gives each man a small cloth bundle before you leave. Salted cod, dried herbs, a few onions. You bow your head in thanks. Experts on maritime trade still discuss whether such transactions were common or rare. Some argue that pirates were too feared to approach in peace, while others believe these small acts of exchange were vital to both sides. Without them, entire crews might have perished and isolated villages might have starved when their own catches failed. Back at the shore, you push the boat into the surf again. The sky has cleared slightly and sunlight breaks through the clouds in thin golden streaks. You glance back once. The woman is standing on the hill, arms crossed, watching you go. For a moment she looks almost like a figure carved from the sea, itself weathered but unbroken. When you return to the ship, the crew gathers to see the bundles. The cook grins like a child. He chops the onions and tosses them into the pot, the smell filling the air. Someone hums an old shanty, slow and wistful. Even the captain looks lighter, his shoulders no longer so tense. That night you eat a stew rich with flavor for the first time in weeks. The taste of onion and cod mixes with smoke and salt. It feels like a miracle. Disguised as supper, the crew grows quiet after content and heavy-footed. The cook wipes his hands and says softly, "Maybe not all land folk hate us." You think of the woman again. Her steady eyes, her silent kindness. The sea outside sigh against the hull, gentle, now almost tender. You lie back full for once and listen to the murmured voices of your crew mates fading into sleep as you drift off. You imagine her cottage on the hill, the smell of bread, the faint glow of her fire against the night. Somewhere out there life still feels warm. The next days blur together in cold mist and gray sky. The food from the village stretches further than anyone expected. The cook rations it with quiet precision, each bowl carefully measured, each portion a lesson in patience. Still, everyone knows it will run out soon. Hunger has a way of counting down the days, even when no one else does. On the fifth morning, the lookout spots smoke on the horizon. A merchant ship, small and alone, struggling against the current. The captain studies it through his spy glass, silent for a long time. Finally he says, "They have food, we do not." The words settle heavily on the deck. It begins without a shout, without a drum. The crew moves like a single creature, practiced and weary. They hoist the sails, adjust the rigging and steer into the wind. The sea surges beneath the hull, spraying cold foam across your face. Your hands tremble as you grip the rope, though you cannot tell if it's from fear or anticipation. According to surviving maritime logs, winter raids were rare but not unheard of. Merchant ships slowed by ice made easy targets, though the risks were high. The cold killed almost as efficiently as cannon fire. Yet hunger makes brave men out of fools. As you draw near, you can see the other ship listing slightly to one side. It sails afraid, and the crew moves sluggishly. They are exhausted, maybe starving too. For a moment, pity flickers in your chest. Then the captain raises his hand and pity vanishes. Hooks fly through the air, thudding into the wooden rails. Men swarm across the gap, boots clanging against frozen planks. The clash is brief. The merchants surrender quickly. Their faces hollow, eyes dark with resignation. No one has the strength for heroics in winter. Inside the hold, barrels wait like treasure chests. The cook cracks one open and the scent of wheat floods the air. Flour, clean and dry. Another barrel holds salted beef, pale and solid, perfectly packed. The men cheer softly, too tired to shout. The cook kneels, almost reverent. There is a note in an old naval account describing how pirates often spared ships that surrendered without a fight, taking only food and fuel. It seems strange, but the sea makes men practical. Killing wastes energy. Mercy saves time. You wonder if that's what this is, mercy dressed as hunger. Among the goods you find something unexpected, a small wooden chest filled with bright red powder. The captain sniffs it and sneezes violently. Pepper, he laughs. Real pepper. The men grin at one another, already dreaming of flavor. A curious detail from a Venetian spice ledger mentions how stolen pepper could fetch a higher price than silver. In northern ports it flavored everything from soup to medicine, and for seafarers it masked the taste of age and salt. Tonight it will do the same for you. The cook works fast, mixing flour with melted snow to make dough, slicing the beef into thin strips. The pepper goes in by handfuls. The smell fills the ship, thick and rich, almost intoxicating. After months of bland meals someone starts humming again, that same low tune that always surfaces when hope does. Some researchers argue that pirate raids like this blurred the line between theft and trade. Crews often took what they needed and offered gold or labor in exchange, though not always fairly. In the end, survival rarely cared for fairness. You eat that night in silence. The stew is sharp, full of heat. The pepper burns your tongue, but you keep eating until your bowl is clean. For a moment the taste brings back memories. You thought you had forgotten. Warm kitchens, full tables, laughter that didn't sound afraid. After the meal, the captain gathers the crew. "We took enough," he says. "No more." He looks out toward the dark horizon. Let the sea keep its balance. You do not know if he means it as prayer or warning. Later, you help toss a few small sacks of grain back onto the merchant ship before cutting it loose. The gesture feels strange, almost tender. The men on the other deck wave weakly, their faces lit by lantern light. One of them shouts something you can't make out. You raise a hand anyway. When the sails fill again and your ship drifts away into the dark, you feel the silence return. The sea hums softly beneath you as though approving. The cook stopped the remaining pepper-like treasure, wrapping it in cloth, promising to make it last that night. As the wind calms, the ship feels warmer. The air inside the galley carries a trace of spice, faint but real. You breathe it in, eyes half closed, and for the first time in weeks you almost forget the cold. The sea is restless again, slapping against the hull in uneven rhythm. The gray horizon looks heavy, as if the sky might fall into the water at any moment. You wake to the sound of clanging pots and the faint scent of smoke. Below deck the cook is already moving, muttering to himself as he tries to coax a fire from damp wood. Cooking on a ship was always an act of defiance. The galley is a small corner wedged near the stern, little more than a box of iron plates and soot-black walls. You crouch beside the cook, watching as he feeds bits of rope fiber into the coals. The flame flutters weakly, then dies. He sighs and rubs his hands together. "She won't catch," he says softly. Records from early naval expeditions describe how cooking at sea was considered both a necessity and a danger. Fire and wood do not mix kindly with salt and tar. Some ships banned open flames altogether, forcing crews to eat cold rations for weeks. Others risked it, knowing that one spark could end everything. You look at the flicker before you and think how thin that line really is. The cook finally coaxes the fire alive, a trembling orange glow that casts his shadow long across the wall. He balances a pot above it and pours in seawater mixed with the last handful of flour. The sound of bubbling fills the air. "Soup," he grins of a kind. You smile back, though your stomach tightens at the thought. One curious discovery from shipwreck excavations shows how sailors sometimes lined their cooking pots with clay to keep salt from corroding the metal. The idea was ingenious but rarely worked. You can imagine the frustration, the smell of burning grease mixed with salt air. Every meal, a compromise. The fire hisses as a drop of seawater splashes into it. Sparks jump bright against the gloom. The cook curses softly, waving a rag to fan it back. "Always a fight," he mutters. He reaches for a lump of salted beef, scraping off the mold before tossing it into the pot. The meat lands with a dull splash and the smell that rises is thick and heavy. In the journals of French privateers there are descriptions of sea stews that mixed anything edible into one pot: biscuit crumbs, dried peas, bits of fish, even leftover coffee grounds for flavor. It was less a recipe and more a ritual. The goal was warmth, not taste. You sip the broth now and the warmth slides down your throat like mercy. Some researchers believe the act of cooking itself mattered more than the meal. It gave the men something to gather around, a kind of hearth in a world without land. You see it now, the crew huddled near the galley, hands outstretched toward the small fire, faces soft in the dim glow. The ship rocks gently and the pot rattles. Someone passes around a crust of bread softened in the stew. You chew slowly, careful not to waste a crumb. The salt burns your tongue, but you hardly mind. A peculiar anecdote in a sailor's letter describes how, during storms, some cooks tied their pots with rope to keep them from flying across the galley. The letter ends with a quiet joke: "We ate more rope than soup that night." You smile at that, imagining laughter cutting through thunder and fear. Outside, the wind picks up again. You can hear the waves slamming harder against the sides. The cook braces himself, gripping the counter as the ship tilts. The pot nearly slides off its stand before he catches it with a shout. The men laugh nervously. "Ain't losing dinner for the sea," he says, still holding the handle tight. Later, when the storm finally calms, you all eat together in silence. The soup is thin but warm, its steam filling the air like breath. For a moment you feel almost safe. The crackle of the fire, the rhythm of spoons against tin bowls, it becomes a lullaby of survival. Academic historians still discuss whether pirates had designated cooks or shared the duty among the crew. Some argue that larger ships carried skilled cooks taken from captured vessels, while others claim the title rotated with luck and endurance. Watching your own cook now, hair singed and face soot-streaked, you think it takes a particular kind of soul to feed others in hell. When the last bowl is empty, the fire burns low. The cook wipes his hands on his apron and sits quietly staring at the embers. The smell of smoke clings to everything, clothes, hair, even dreams. You close your eyes and breathe it in, letting it settle deep inside you. Above deck, the wind shifts, the stars appear one by one, faint and trembling. Somewhere out there, beyond the dark waves, another ship might be cooking its own strange stew, another crew huddled against the same cold. The thought comforts you. Strangely, you are not alone in your hunger. You finish your last sip of broth, feel the warmth spread through your chest and lean back against the wall. The ship sways gently, the pot cools beside you and the fire fades to soft red coals. For the first time in days, your belly feels heavy enough to let sleep find you. The next dawn breaks slow and silver. The air feels slightly softer, the wind less cruel than before. You climb to the deck and breathe in the scent of salt and smoke that clings to the morning. The crew moves quietly, half awake, their boots thudding against the damp planks. Somewhere below, the cook is humming again and a different smell drifts up, this time sweet, sharp and warm. When you step into the galley, you see him holding a small pouch, its contents glowing faintly orange in the light. "Cinnamon," he says with a grin, "found it in one of the stolen crates." He opens the pouch and the scent fills the room instantly. It smells of faraway markets, of places where the air itself feels rich. You breathe deeply and for a moment the cold fades. Documents from spice traders of the late medieval period show that pirates often stumbled upon goods they didn't even understand the value of. Cinnamon, nutmeg, pepper and citrus fruits were among the most prized cargoes. Sometimes the crew kept them for barter. Sometimes they used them in wild experiments with food and drink. Just to feel civilized again, the cook sprinkles a pinch into a pot of thin girl. The smell transforms it, making even hunger seem elegant. You dip your spoon in and taste. The sweetness surprises you. Gentle but real, it tastes like something from another life, when meals were more than survival. Curiously, a surviving letter from a Dutch corsair's wife mentioned sending him oranges and dried ginger before a winter voyage. She believed the warm flavor would guard him from the cold. Historians now think she meant scurvy, though she could never have known that word. Still, her care carried truth. A little warmth goes a long way. At sea, the men gather closer, drawn by the scent. Someone jokes that the cook must have stolen a merchant's wife to make something smell that good. Laughter ripples through the room. Even the captain smiles faintly, standing near the door. With his arms crossed, the light catches the gold trim on his coat, dull with salt but still proud. The cook pours cups of steaming liquid for everyone. It is thin, almost like tea made from dried peel and water. You take a sip. It tastes bitter, but alive. Citrus, the cook explains, from the wreck thought it might help. You nod, your body feels grateful, even if your tongue protests. Some scholars of maritime medicine point out that even before the formal discovery of vitamins, sailors knew instinctively that sour fruits healed them. They didn't need science to see the difference between pale skin and health. You look around and see it in your crew mates' faces already, the faint flush returning the spark in tired eyes. The cook sets aside a small bowl, saving a few spices for later. "Never use it all at once," he says softly. A taste of the exotic is like gold. You spend it too fast and you forget its worth. You nod again, watching how carefully he folds the pouch shut. A curious little note appears in the records of a captured pirate ship called La Fortuna. Among its spoils was a cargo of sugar and cocoa beans from the Iberian coast. The crew reportedly mixed the cocoa with seawater and lard to make a bitter drink. The chronicler who wrote about it called the concoction an abomination. Yet the pirates swore it gave them strength. You imagine it now. The taste of chocolate on a frozen deck, strange and sacred. Even the roughest men crave sweetness. When the world turns bitter, the captain begins to speak quietly to the crew. He tells them the winds are shifting, that the seas ahead may bring trade routes ripe for interception. His words sound almost gentle. He knows that full bellies make loyal sailors. He knows that morale can keep men alive when rations cannot. Later, as the sun rises higher, you step back onto the deck. The sky is pale, gold now sure, with thin clouds. The air carries faint traces of cinnamon and smoke. You breathe it in deeply, letting the warmth settle in your chest. There is still debate among historians about how often pirates tasted luxury. Some claim it was rare fleeting moments of decadence between storms and scarcity. Others suggest that spices and sweets were not only stolen goods but symbols of defiance, a reminder that even outlaws could enjoy the pleasures of kings, if only for a night. You glance toward the horizon. The sea glitters, faintly calm for now. Behind you, laughter drifts from the galley, soft and unguarded. For the first time in weeks, the ship feels less like a prison and more like a home. You sit against the mast holding your empty cup, the scent of cinnamon still lingering on your fingers. The wind hums low through the ropes and the sound is almost kind. You close your eyes and let yourself rest, imagining warm markets, orange groves and sunlit harbors. You will never see the ship cars gently beneath you, steady and alive. The sea has fed you bitterness for months, but today, just for a moment, it gives back sweetness. By evening, the sweetness of spice has faded, replaced once again by the raw scent of salt and sweat. The warmth of that small miracle is gone and the ship's hold smells like what it truly is, a tomb for food and patience. You descend the ladder slowly, your boots sinking into damp planks. The deeper you go, the stronger the stench grows. The hold is a world of its own, dim and breathing wooden barrels line the walls, some cracked open, others oozing slow trails of grease. You feel the air grow thick as you move between them. The smell of rot salt and old meat wraps around you like smoke. Your stomach twists, unsure whether from hunger or disgust. Surviving naval logs describe the lower decks of medieval ships as places where food went to die. The mixture of moisture, heat from the galley and trapped air turned the storage rooms into slow ovens of decay. Even salted goods suffered. Butter grew green, meat softened into sludge and bread sprouted things that never should have been alive. You can see it now, glistening faintly in the lantern light. You crouch near a leaking barrel. The brine has turned cloudy and inside chunks of something once edible float like ghosts. You reach in with a hook, pulling up a slab of meat slick with slime. The smell makes you recoil. You drop it quickly and wipe your hands on your coat, though the grease never really leaves. One traveler's diary from the early 15th century describes sailors coating spoiled food with vinegar and spice to hide the taste. It worked just enough to swallow without gagging. You wonder if they knew they were eating sickness or if denial tasted better than hunger. The cook joins you, lantern in hand. His eyes squint through the smoke. "It's turning faster than I thought," he mutters. The cold above keeps the air damp. Salt can't fight it forever. He taps one of the barrels with his knife. Listening to the hollow sound, 2 more days, maybe 3, before it's all gone bad. You nod your throat tight. The idea of losing what little you have left feels unbearable. He sighs, lifting the lantern higher. The flame throws shapes against the walls, dark stains, crawling shadows, movement that might be rats or worse. Oddly enough, there are old accounts of pirates keeping cats aboard. For this very reason, the animals were not pets but soldiers in an endless war against vermin. Some ships even listed them among the crew. You glance around and almost wish for a cat's quick eyes in this reeking dark. The cook finds a smaller barrel tucked behind the others and cracks it open. Inside are onions, shriveled but still holding their form. He grins faintly. "Small miracles," he says. You help him lift it, carrying it toward the stairs. Each step cars like a warning. When you reach the deck, fresh air floods your lungs sharp and clean. The cook wipes sweat from his brow, muttering, "At least the stink doesn't climb all the way up here." You glance at the sea and realize how deceptive the open air can be. Above the world is endless and clear. Below it feeds quietly waiting to poison whoever forgets to fear it. One strange artifact found in the wreck of an English brigantine was a small clay pot filled with dried mint leaves. Archaeologists suspect it was used to cover the stench of the hold. Imagine that, a handful of herbs standing between sanity and madness. You almost smile, thinking of how fragile comfort becomes when survival is the only measure of wealth. The captain comes down from the helm, glancing at the cook. "How bad?" he asks simply. The cook hesitates, then tells the truth. The captain nods. "Once we ration again half portions," a low murmur ripples through the deck, but no one argues. Hunger has already taught them that silence saves strength. Some maritime historians still argue about how captains managed rations during long winters. A few claim it was done democratically, others insist it was tyranny disguised as order. In truth, it was likely both. The man who controls food controls every life on board. You watch the crew line up for their small bowls of stew that night. The smell of rot clings to it, faint but undeniable. Some men hold their noses, others eat without blinking. You do the same, forcing each swallow. The body learns to obey hunger before taste. The wind outside grows stronger, rattling the ropes like bones. The ship groans with emotion, but the rhythm is almost soothing. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing through your mouth, trying to forget the smell that lives below your feet. After dinner, the cook tosses a handful of mint and onion peel into the fire, the scent sharpens, cutting briefly through the damp air. He leans against the wall, eyes tired but steady. "It's not the hunger that kills," he says quietly. "It's the smell." You stop believing in food. After a while you nod, not sure what to say. The truth sits heavy between you. The sea does not starve you quickly. It starves you slowly, by turning food into fear. When you finally crawl into your hammock, the air feels almost thick enough to chew. You breathe shallowly, the taste of smoke and decay still lingering on your tongue. Above the wood cars, the waves whisper and the ship drifts through the night like a ghost, searching for a place to forget its hunger. When morning comes, the air feels brittle, as if the world might crack if touched too suddenly. The frost has returned, glittering faintly on the ropes and the rails. You wake to the captain's voice calling for a shore party again. The stores below deck have reached their limit. If you are to eat at all this week, you must find what the land will give. The island ahead looks bleak, a stretch of snow and pine framed by jagged cliffs, the sea sighs against it. A slow, steady rhythm. You row toward the beach with 6 others, your hands aching from the oars, the cold bites through your gloves and your breath fogs. In front of you, every sound feels sharp enough to break. When the boat grinds onto the shore, the silence is so complete that even the crunch of your boots seems too loud. The air smells of pine sap and ice. Somewhere inland a raven calls once and then goes quiet. Old coastal records from Norway and Scotland describe how stranded crews survived winters by turning inland, hunting deer and rabbits or stripping bark to make flour. The woods you face now look both promising and cruel. Trees stand like soldiers, close and still beneath them the snow hides everything. You carry a small axe and a knife. The cook carries a net for fish, though the stream nearby looks half frozen. You move in pairs, spreading out through the forest. The air feels heavier under the trees muffling your steps. You can smell the sap, the damp soil trapped beneath the frost. A curious account from a 17th-century sailor's diary describes how some marooned pirates learned to boil pine needles for tea. He wrote that it tastes of fire and bitterness, yet keeps death at bay. You think of that as you break a small branch and hold it to your nose. The scent is sharp and clean, almost medicinal. After an hour one of the men calls out he has found animal tracks, faint impressions leading toward a small clearing. You follow your breath quick and shallow. At the edge of the clearing you spot movement, something brown against the snow, a deer, thin but alive. The men move without a word. The arrow flies, quick and silent. The animal falls. You feel both triumph and sorrow. The forest feels it too, the stillness deepening as if it is listening. The men drag the carcass to the trees, whispering prayers that belong to no church. Blood steams against the snow. The cook kneels and begins his work. According to fragments of ship journals found in museum archives, pirates rarely hunted skillfully but learned quickly when they had to. Hunger makes teachers of desperation. You watch as the cook cuts strips of meat and packs them in snow. His movements calm and careful. Nearby, another sailor gathers bark from a birch tree. He scrapes the white layers until they curl like paper. "You can eat it," he says, smiling weakly. "Tastes like old boots, but it fills you." He is right. When boiled, the inner bark softens into something halfway between food and memory. There is no clear consensus among maritime historians on how often stranded crews manage to hunt successfully in winter. Some accounts tell of miraculous hunts that save dozens. Others speak only of failure and frostbite. You understand now why both can be true. By dusk, you return to the beach carrying your meager prize. The sea glows faintly pink. Under the fading Sunday you can smell the salt again mingling with the iron scent of blood. The boat cars as you push it back into the water. The meat is wrapped tightly in sailcloth, a fragile promise against the cold. When you reach the ship, the crew gathers silently. The cook works by lantern light, slicing thin pieces to hang above the galley fire. The smoke rises in soft spirals, carrying the smell of wood and salt through the air. For the first time in weeks, the scent of real meat fills the ship. Men close their eyes as they breathe it in, as if that alone might feed them. Later, when you finally eat, the taste is wild and raw. The meat is tough, smoky and faintly sweet from the sap of the wood. It fills your stomach, but more than that, it quiets something inside you. The fire crackles softly and for a while no one speaks. One curious note found in a Baltic monastery record mentions a group of sailors who, after hunting inland, returned to sea with pine boughs tied to their masts. They believed it kept them safe from hunger and storms. You look up at the frozen rigging and imagine doing the same. The thought feels strangely right. The cook sets aside a strip of meat to dry further for the next storm, he says. You nod, knowing it will come soon enough. The sea is never kind for long. As the night deepens, you sit on the deck watching the pale glow of the moon on the waves. The forest still lingers in your mind, the quiet trees, the falling snow, the breath of the deer as it faded out. Here everything feels temporary, the cold, the hunger, even life. Yet for now you are full and that is enough. The wind eases the next morning, carrying the faintest scent of earth and pine from the island you left behind. The sea looks calmer now, a flat sheet of dull gray under a sky so pale it could be made of glass. You wake to the rhythmic thud of footsteps on the deck. Men are hauling something up from below, laughing softly, their voices cautious but lighter than they have been in weeks. When you look over the rail, you see small wooden boxes, crudely built but cared for. Inside each box, a few clumps of soil, cradle green shoots, tiny, fragile things no longer than your finger. The cook beams with quiet pride. Our ship's garden, he says, grew them from scraps we kept you. Stare at the sprouts eyed by their defiance. Written evidence from the 16th century suggests that long before formal maritime farming, some crews experimented with growing small patches of herbs and greens aboard their ships. They used old barrels or crates filled with soil taken from ports, watering them with condensed steam or collected rain. The results were meager but precious. Each leaf was a small rebellion against the emptiness of the sea. The cook points to one box and explains that the sprouts are onions, another filled with parsley and a third with something that looks like cabbage but thinner. You touch a leaf and feel its softness. It smells faintly of life, a smell you had almost forgotten existed. A curious note from a Venetian captain's log described sailors singing to their plants, as if coaxing them to grow faster. He wrote that the sound of human voices seemed to make the herbs stronger. You glance at your cook humming as he sprinkles water from a tin cup, and you wonder if he has read that same secret somewhere. In the rhythm of survival, the men stand in a circle around the boxes watching, as if witnessing magic. It won't feed us much, the cook admits, but it reminds us that we can still grow something in this cold world. No one disagrees. Even the captain nods a faint smile, softening his weathered face. While the cook tends the plants, you help scrape bits of seaweed from the side of the hull. It grows in long green ribbons, slick and strong. The air fills with the smell of brine and iron as you haul it in another kind of garden. You joke and the cook chuckles. Some surviving ship logs from northern trade routes mention that seaweed became a crucial supplement when food ran low. Sailors boiled it into soup, dried it for storage or used it as a binding agent to stretch flour. It provided salt, minerals and, most importantly, texture, the illusion of something fresh. You toss a bundle onto the deck, glistening in the dim light. The cook begins chopping it into thin strands, mixing it with bits of dried onion and the smallest pinch of pepper from the precious pouch. When he sets the pot on the fire, the smell is strange but oddly comforting. It reminds you of the shore, of tide pools and rockweed. You dip a spoon in and taste it. Is chewy, smoky and surprisingly filling. There is a story in a sailor's letter from a Baltic fleet, about how one crew survived an entire winter on seaweed and boiled bark. He wrote, "We became half fish ourselves, but we lived." The letter ends without bitterness, only quiet pride. You feel that same pride now as you eat the warmth spreading slowly through your body. Researchers still disagree on whether these early shipboard gardens truly improved survival or merely lifted morale. Yet as you watch your fellow sailors pass the small bowl of soup around, you know the answer doesn't matter. Hope itself has become a kind of nourishment. When the meal is done, the cook carefully places the boxes back near the stern, where they will catch what sunlight exists. He tucks a bit of cloth around them to keep the wind from burning the leaves. The gesture feels almost tender, like tucking a child into bed. The captain steps beside you, looking down at the tiny garden. "Strange thing," he murmurs, "men who steal gold and burn cities will whisper over sprouts like monks." You nod, understanding exactly what he means. Hunger humbles everything. As dusk falls, the sky turns the color of dull peat. The wind carries the smell of seaweed and smoke across the deck. The men are quiet now, tired but calm. You sit near the boxes watching the little green shoots tremble in the wind. Their roots cling to the soil, to life itself, no matter how thin. One more curious note from an archaeologist's study of shipwrecks mentions fragments of plant matter found in broken pots near the stern of a privateer's vessel. They were too fragile to identify, but pollen traces suggested herbs, parsley and thyme. The evidence is small, but the implication is beautiful. Even the roughest sailors carried gardens with them into eternity. The night air grows colder. You pull your coat tight and listen to the waves lapping against the hull. The ship sways gently and the plants shift with it. Little pieces of earth are drift on an endless sea. You realize that this too is survival, not just eating but tending, believing that life can still grow. Even here you close your eyes, the faint scent of salt and soil clinging to your hands in the darkness, the sound of the waves blends with the soft whisper of leaves, and for a moment you dream not of food but of spring. The next morning begins in silence. A thin mist hangs over the deck, softening the edges of the world. The wind has died completely, and the ship sits still as if waiting for something. You rise from your hammock and stretch, feeling the stiffness in your limbs. The air smells faintly of iron and smoke. But underneath it there is another scent, something sour, sharp and wrong. When you glance around, you see it in the faces of the men. Their eyes are heavy, their skin pale and waxy. One sailor rubs his gums and winces. Another tries to lift a rope but drops it, his arm trembling. You know what this is, even if you cannot name it. The cook whispers the word that no one wants to hear: scurvy. Before science gave it a name, sailors called it the rotting sickness. Their gums bled, their teeth loosened, their joints acid, until walking became agony. Chroniclers from the 14th century describe men whose skin turned gray and whose breath grew foul, as decay began from within. It was a slow betrayal by the body, starving not from lack of food but from lack of something invisible. You watch one of the younger sailors trying to eat his ration of biscuit. His teeth leave bloody marks on the hard surface. He spits and swears softly, then laughs without humor. "Guess, my mouth's gone soft," he says, but his eyes flicker with fear. The cook hurries to his small garden, checking the fragile shoots. He plucks one of the green leaves and chews it thoughtfully. "Fresh greens," he says. "Maybe they'll help." He begins handing out small handfuls to anyone willing to try. The men accept them like relics. The taste is sharp, almost bitter, but they chew slowly, savoring it as if it were gold. A surviving account from an English privateer in the 15th century mentions a similar practice. The crew, weakened by winter, began eating the shoots of barley and onions grown in damp barrels. The chronicler wrote, "It was like biting life itself." You understand that now. The captain orders that the remaining citrus rind from the earlier wreck be boiled into water. The cook obeys, filling the galley with the smell of sour steam. It burns the air in your throat but feels oddly cleansing. The men line up, each taking a small cup. They drink quietly, eyes half closed. There is an entry in a Spanish navigator's diary describing how crews once believed scurvy came from laziness or sin, not diet. Some prayed instead of eating, waiting for forgiveness. That never came. The sea is full of such misunderstandings. You can almost hear their voices echoing in the windless air. The cook begins experimenting again, this time with seaweed. He chops it fine, mixing it with the last of the onions and boiling it into a dark broth. The smell is heavy, almost medicinal. You sip it and, though the taste is strange, it warms you from inside. A few of the men manage faint smiles after drinking. For the first time in days, the silence feels less hopeless. Historians still discuss whether pirates knew the connection between fresh food and health or simply stumbled upon it by luck. Some argue that older sailors, who had seen countless voyages, carried folk wisdom that kept them alive long before science could explain why. Whatever the reason, the instinct to seek green things at sea became the difference between life and death. By afternoon the cook starts rationing the greens like treasure. Each man receives a few leaves a day. The crew guards them fiercely, treating them as sacred. You see one sailor whisper a prayer before eating, his voice barely audible above the creak of the hull. Later that night, as the lanterns flicker, you sit beside the cook. He stirs the broth, lost in thought. "Funny, isn't it?" he says, "how we're surrounded by water and all we ever die of is thirst." You nod. Hunger and thirst are easy enemies. The invisible ones, like this sickness, are harder to fight. You watch as he drops another handful of seaweed into the pot, the green strands curling in the steam. "We'll keep boiling it," he says. "Something in it feels right." You don't argue. Faith, even in soup, is still faith. Outside, the sea lies flat and glassy. The moon's reflection stretches across it, pale and fragile. You look at your hands, the skin raw and cracked, and wonder what small, invisible things keep you alive. Vitamins you cannot name, hopes you cannot measure. Before sleeping, you check the small garden boxes again. The leaves tremble gently in the night breeze. They look impossibly alive, defying cold and salt and darkness. You touch one softly and the scent of green fills your fingers. You lie back in your hammock, eyes half open, listening to the faint hum of the sea. Against the hull. Somewhere below deck, men breathe in rhythm, alive for one more night. You close your eyes, whisper a thank you to the green things and drift into uneasy dreams where the air smells of lemon and sunlight. The ship cars softly as dawn seeps across the horizon. The air smells faintly of smoke and brine, but underneath it lingers something strange, the pungent mix of vinegar, tar and hope. You sit up slowly, feeling the ache in your joints, the stiffness of too many cold nights. Around you, the men are stirring, groaning quietly, rubbing their eyes with hands cracked from salt and frost. The cook moves between them with quiet determination, his small pouch of remedies clinking against his belt. It is not medicine, not really, just bits of things collected from every shore, every wreck, every whispered superstition, a scrap of dried kelp, a lump of tar. A vial of vinegar saved from a merchant ship long ago. You watch him lay them out on the table like charms against death. Contemporary medical writings from the 15th century describe shipboard healers who relied on folk knowledge more than science. They brewed tonics from herbs and oils, mixing belief with necessity. Many of their cures were useless, but some worked by accident. You wonder if the cook's hand trembles from age or from the burden of being the only man still pretending to understand life and death. He pours vinegar into a cup, mixes it with water and adds a pinch of ash from the galley fire for the blood, he says, though his voice wavers. He offers it to a sailor whose gums are swollen and bleeding. The man grimaces at the first sip, then coughs violently, but after a moment his breathing steadies. Everyone stares in silence. Maybe it helps, maybe it is just hoped in liquid form. You remember reading about sailors chewing leather. When food ran out, some softened it by boiling it with vinegar or seawater until it became something chewable. The taste was awful, but it kept the jaw moving and the mind occupied. One battered journal found in a wreck near the Baltic describes a crew boiling their shoes for supper. The author called it a meal of pride and shame. The cook pulls a strip of leather from an old harness and drops it into the pot. The sound is small but final. He glances at you and shrugs, "We use what the sea leaves us." You nod. Hunger makes philosophers of everyone. There is a curious mention in an Icelandic saga about sailors who believed urine could purify the body. During illness they drank it mixed with seawater, calling it the bitter tonic. Modern readers recoil, but the chronicler noted that some survived who otherwise might not have. You look at the faces around you and understand that disgust has no place in survival. The cook sets the pot to boil. Again, muttering to himself, he adds herbs from the ship's small garden, a few grains of salt and a piece of rope fiber to thicken it. The steam fills the air, sharp and acrid, but at least it smells alive. You can almost convince yourself that the scent carries healing. Some researchers studying maritime culture believe that these improvised remedies serve less as cures and more as rituals. The act of mixing, brewing and sharing something warm give the illusion of control over an uncontrollable world. Watching the cook now, his hands steady despite exhaustion, you know they are right. He ladles the hot liquid into a cracked wooden bowl and hands it to a man lying against the wall. The sailor's lips are pale, his eyes sunken, but he drinks. The smell makes your stomach twist. Yet the moment he swallows he exhales softly like a man who has just remembered the taste of life outside. The wind rattles, the rigging, the sea murmurs in low tones. The world feels smaller each day. But in the galley the fire burns steady. The men sit closer together, sharing warmth. That is as much belief as heat. An obscure record from a French surgeon's log notes how crews sometimes made ficuses from tobacco ash and whale oil to rub on aching limbs. The mixture smelled vile, but the warmth eased the pain. The cook tries something similar now. Mixing salt with grease scraped from the bottom of a barrel, he spreads it over a sailor's swollen knee. The man hisses in pain, then sigh in relief. "Feels like fire," he mutters, smiling weakly. The captain watches from the doorway. He says nothing, only nods once before walking away. You suspect even he doesn't know whether he believes in these cures, but he believes in what they give the crew something to do, something to trust. As night falls, the ship settles into a kind of uneasy calm. The smell of vinegar still lingers sharp in the air. You sit beside the fire listening to it crackle. The cook hums softly while cleaning his cups. The sound is almost like a lullaby. In one of the old sailor songs there is a verse that goes, "If the salt doesn't cure and the smoke don't mend, still we drink, still we sing till the sea makes an end." You hum it quietly now, your voice barely above the hiss of the coals. Before sleeping, the cook presses a piece of dried seaweed into your hand. "Chew this," he says, "not for the body, for the mind." You obey the taste, bitter and metallic it grounds you, pulling you back from the edge of despair. When you finally close your eyes, the air feels heavier but warmer. Somehow. The ship rocks gently, like the sea itself is tired of cruelty. For one night you breathe in the smell of smoke and vinegar and salt and think of it not as decay but as the scent of survival. The sea is quieter now, the waves small and regular, as if the ocean itself is catching its breath. You wake to the smell of smoke and the low murmur of voices below deck. The cook is already at work again, stirring the morning's thin porridge. Men line up with their bowls, each waiting in silence. Hunger has made them polite, almost reverent. You sit with your portion, steam rising faintly in the cold air. It is little more than boiled flour and salt, but it is warm and that warmth feels like kindness. You glance around and notice the same pattern you have seen for weeks now. Some bowls are filled higher than others. Some men eat first while others wait. Power on a ship has its own rituals. The captain eats last but always has the largest serving. The cook gets a share for his labor, slightly more than the rest. The weakest men often trade portions for favors. You see it in their eyes as they glance at one another, calculated patience, quiet resentment, gratitude wrapped around fear. An early 17th century naval manual describes how ships divided food by rank and role. Captains and quartermasters received double rations, carpenters and surgeons a little more ordinary sailors. The rest, it was meant to maintain order. Yet hunger made it dangerous. When the sea froze and the stores ran low, fairness dissolved faster than salt in boiling water. You watch one sailor, a young man with frostbitten fingers, slip a chunk of bread from his bowl to another who looks worse. No one says anything, but everyone sees. The gesture is both mercy and risk. The cook looks away pretending not to notice. Curiously, a few recovered pirate codes of conduct list equality in rations as a founding rule. The Articles of Bartholomew Roberts, written in the early 18th century, declare that all men should share food alike, regardless of rank. Yet even in those romantic documents, small exceptions appear: an extra biscuit for the cook, a cup of rum for the quartermaster. The ideals were noble, the reality was human. You finish your meal slowly, chewing each bite, as though stretching time itself. The taste is bland, but the silence is worse. No one speaks of the division, but it hangs in the air thick as smoke. The captain steps down from the upper deck, his boots echoing against the planks. He looks at the line of men still waiting for their turn. "Half rations until the next catch," he says evenly. No one protests. The order feels inevitable, like the tide. Researchers who study maritime discipline often note that food distribution was the true measure of control at sea. A captain who failed to feed his men risked mutiny. A captain who fed them unfairly risked something. Slower and colder, quiet, hatred that grew like mold in the dark. The cook begins scraping the bottom of the pot, dividing the last spoonfuls among the empty bowls. His face is unreadable, but his hands tremble slightly. "That's the last of the flour," he says under his breath. You look at him and realize that his exhaustion runs deeper than hunger. He carries the guilt of survival. Later that day, as the ship drifts through pale light, a small argument breaks out near the bow. Two men, both hollow with fatigue, stand facing each other. One claims the other took his ration of dried peas. The voices rise, sharp and brittle. The captain appears within moments, silent as a shadow. He steps between them and takes both bowls without a word. He pours half of each into the sea. Now, neither eats more than the other, he says calmly, then walks away. The sea swallows the food without trace. The men lower their heads. It is a brutal kind of justice, but it works. No one fights again that day. An old sailor's letter kept in a Danish archive tells of a winter when the captain enforced rationing by random draw each day. The cook placed the portions in sealed cups. The men drew lots, never knowing whose share was largest. It was madness disguised as fairness, but it kept them from killing one another. You wonder if your own captain has read such tales or if cruelty simply repeats itself without instruction. Night comes early. The men sit in small clusters, whispering. The cook moves among them, checking faces, offering what comfort he can. You find a quiet corner by the mast and stare into the dark sea. Hunger feels different now, less like pain and more like pressure, as if the ocean itself presses inward. The historian in you, the one who still remembers books and lectures, knows this pattern well. Every society reveals its truth when food grows scarce. At sea, stripped of everything else, fairness becomes a myth and survival becomes the only rule. The captain walks past you once more, his coat heavy with frost. He pauses for a moment, looking out at the black water. "Tomorrow we fish," he says quietly, perhaps to himself. Then he turns and disappears below. You stay on deck long after the others have gone to sleep, listening to the slow breathing of the ship. The waves slap gently against the hull, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere below the cook dreams of bread that will never rise again. You close your eyes and imagine a table where everyone eats the same, where hunger is a memory and not a companion. The wind stirs lightly, carrying the scent of smoke and salt. You breathe it in, hold it and let it go. The air smells different tonight, not cleaner, not warmer, just changed. You notice it the moment you wake, a mix of wood smoke and something sweet, faint as memory. The cook is already up bending over the fire, his hands busy with small bundles wrapped in cloth. You watch for a while before asking what he is doing. He glances up with a tired smile. "Borrowed some wisdom from the women ashore," he says. "They taught me how to make something worth remembering." You are not sure what he means at first, but then you recall the women from the coastal village, the ones who traded bread for honey and salt. Their faces return to you in flashes, wind-chapped cheeks, steady eyes, hands that worked without hesitation. You had thought of them only as traders, but the cook clearly saw more. He unwraps one of the bundles to reveal dried roots, herbs, and thin slices of something red. They called it winter broth. He explained softly, said their mothers made it when the sea froze and nothing grew. In the records of northern port towns there are brief mentions of women who supplied food to seafarers through the harsh months. Some were innkeepers, some widows, some simply kind souls who understood that even thieves could starve. They sold pickled vegetables, smoked fish and sometimes small cakes of pressed oats bound with honey. The trade was quiet, often secret, yet without them, ships would have vanished long before spring. The cook sets a pot on the fire and adds snow. Watching it melt, the water hisses against the metal, the steam curling upward in ghostly ribbons. He drops in the roots and herbs, their colors fading into the liquid. "They said to stir it slowly," he murmurs, "so it remembers the land." You think of the stories whispered in ports about pirate wives, women who hid food in baskets or smuggled barrels of beer out under the noses of guards. In some letters preserved by coastal families, these women are described not as criminals but as saviors. They kept their men alive through cleverness and stubborn care. You wonder how many of them were forgotten once the ship sailed away. The cook passes you a small piece of dried oat cake, hard as stone. "They gave me this too," he says, said it'll keep for a year if you can stand the taste. You take a cautious bite. It is dry and sweet at once. Heavy on the tongue. The flavor feels like earth, something honest. One intriguing passage from an old merchant's journal describes how women in Brittany boiled sea salt with molasses to make a dark syrup used to preserve fruit and meat. He wrote that the pirates who raided his stores later thanked the recipe for saving them. You find yourself smiling at the irony, mercy wrapped in theft. The cook hums while the broth simmers, his voice low and steady. The smell fills the galley. Strange and comforting at once. Men begin to drift closer, drawn by the promise of something different. They do not ask what it is, they simply stand and breathe. Academic discussions about seafaring communities often ignore the invisible networks of women behind them. Yet here you can feel their presence, in the pot, in the scent that carries warmth through the freezing air. Every taste of spice or sweetness came from hands that stayed on land, unseen but vital. When the cook finally ladles out the broth, the color is deep amber. You sip carefully, it tastes of roots and smoke and something faintly floral. What did they put in it, you ask? He shrugs, didn't ask. Maybe love, maybe dirt? The answer makes you laugh quietly, and the sound feels strange in your throat, like a bird that has forgotten its song. One curious note from a Flemish monastery account mentions that when pirates were captured, their belongings often included homemade preserves and small jars of dried herbs. The monks were puzzled, unsure why such men carried flavors of domestic life into battle. You look around at the faces of your crew mates, scarred, hungry, silent, and understand. Even killers long for comfort. As the night deepens, the cook sits back wiping his hands. The fire glows softly, painting his face in shades of orange and gold. He looks older but peaceful. The women who taught me this, he says, said that food remembers kindness better than people do. You let that thought linger, letting the warmth of the broth sink into your chest. Above deck, the sky has cleared. The moon hangs low, reflecting off the calm water somewhere in the distance. You imagine those women tending their own fires, stirring their pots, whispering stories into the steam. The same wind that moves their hair touches your face. Now. It feels like a connection. The sea cannot wash away. You finish the last of your broth, savoring it slowly. The sweetness clings to your tongue, faint but real. You close your eyes and imagine the hands that made it possible, the hidden cooks, the quiet traders, the wives who defied storms, and soldiers alike. Their work lingers here, even on this cold deck, carried forward through taste and memory. When you lie down that night, the ship rocks gently beneath you. The warmth in your stomach feels like something more than food. It feels like someone, somewhere, still believing you deserve to live. The wind changes by morning, rising softly from the south. The air feels almost gentle for the first time in weeks, and with it comes a shift among the crew. Voices are calmer, movement slower. You stand at the rail watching thin streaks of sunlight slide over the water. For a moment you could almost mistake it for peace. Inside the galley, the cook is already working, but not just with food. He has placed a small wooden figure on the table, carved roughly into the shape of a fish. Besides it lies a candle, stub, half melted, and a piece of parchment scrolled with words you cannot read. You ask what it is, and he smiles faintly for luck. He says for mercy. Sailors in every age have made offerings before meals. The sea demands it. Chronicles from Mediterranean ports mention men who sprinkled salt into the waves before eating, while those in the north sang hymns to forgotten saints. It was never about religion, not really. It was about balance. The ocean fed you, but it could also take everything away. You watch as the cook lights the candle. The tiny flame flickers, fighting the draft. He murmurs something under his breath, a prayer or maybe a recipe. The other men lower their heads out of respect. Superstition and hunger share the same roots. Both make you believe in what you cannot see. A curious note from a 1420 ship log tells of a crew that refused to eat before throwing crumbs to the gulls circling overhead. They believed the birds carried messages to lost souls below the sea. You can see gulls now wheeling above the masts, their cries cutting through the quiet. For a moment you wonder if they are listening. The cook's voice breaks the silence. "Eat slow," he says softly, handing out bowls of broth. "The gods of the deep prefer patience." You smile at the phrase. It sounds like something he half believes, half invented. The soup tastes of salt and onion, warmed with a trace of herbs. The flavor is simple, but it sits gently in the body. There is an entry in a Dominican friar's diary describing how sailors blessed their meals not with words but with gestures. They tapped the bowl twice with their spoon, then lifted it toward the sky. You find yourself doing it now, not out of faith but out of habit. The sound rings faintly like the ship answering back. The captain appears quietly beside you. He eats standing up, as he always does, but his eyes linger on the candle. "You think it helps?" he asks. The cook shrugs. "Helps me? Maybe helps the food taste less lonely." The captain grunts but does not disagree. Some scholars who study maritime life suggest that these rituals of faith acted as psychological anchors. They reminded crews that they were part of something larger, even if that something was as fickle as the sea. Watching the flicker of the candle, you understand the comfort in that. When the meal ends, the cook carefully pinches out the flame and sets the little wooden fish in its place beside the pot. "He'll keep watch," he says. The crew chuckles softly, but no one moves it. Small symbols like this take on power when the world offers none. Outside, the wind grows stronger, carrying with it the faint smell of salt and kelp. You step onto the deck and breathe deeply. The gulls follow the ship, their white wings bright against the dark water. You scatter a few crumbs of hardtack into the air. They catch them mid-flight, shrieking with delight somewhere behind you. The cook laughs. "See," he says, "they approve." There is still uncertainty among historians about how deeply faith guided pirates. Some argue that most were cynics who mocked prayer until the waves rose high enough to scare them. Others believe that their lives, so close to death, were bound to ritual, by necessity. Watching the gulls fade into the mist, you think both may be true. Later that evening, when the sky turns the color of rust, the cook lights the candle again. The men gather quietly, not speaking. The flame dances reflected in their tired eyes. The captain lowers his head, not quite praying but listening. The cook begins a low chant, a mix of words and sounds that belong to no single tongue. It flows like the sea itself, calm and endless. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The rhythm matches the slow creak of the ship, the beat of waves against the hull. An old superstition claimed that singing before sleep kept the sea spirits from dragging you under. You hum softly along, your voice barely audible. The others join in one by one until the sound fills the darkness like a heartbeat. When the song fades, the cook blows out the candle. The smoke curls upward, disappearing into the shadows. The small wooden fish glows faintly in the lamplight, coated in soot and salt. "He'll listen for us," the cook says quietly. "He'll remind the sea we've been polite." The crew laughs softly, but not mockingly. You smile too, feeling. An unexpected calm settles over you. Outside, the waves whisper against the hull, almost gentle. Now you lie in your hammock later, eyes open to the dark ceiling. Above, the faint scent of burned wax lingers in the air. Somewhere, the wooden fish stands guard beside a pot that is finally empty. You think of faith, not the kind with churches and sermons, but the quiet faith that says, tomorrow will still come. You let that thought carry you into sleep, your body rocking gently with the sea's slow breath, the taste of salt still on your lips and the memory of candlelight warming the dark. The sun finally breaks through the clouds the next morning, flooding the deck with pale gold. It has been so long since light felt warm that for a moment the crew simply stands there silent, letting the glow touch their faces. The sea sparkles like shards of glass, and for once the wind is soft. You can smell something strange rising from the galley, sweet, smoky and thick. It reminds you of markets from far away, ports of feasts you thought you had forgotten. When you step inside, you see the cook, grinning like a man who has just found treasure. "Fortune smiled," he says, gesturing to a wooden crate half open beside him. Inside lie 2 small casks of wine, a handful of dried figs and a sack of grain stolen from the last raid. "Tonight," he says, "we feast." The word feels almost holy after so many nights of thin stew. The men cheer softly, too weak for shouting, but full of quiet excitement. They move with new energy, helping the cook prepare. The air fills with the sound of knives tapping against the counter, the crackle of fire and the smell of roasting meat. Contemporary letters from merchant captains often describe the aftermath of pirate attacks not in blood but in loss. How barrels of wine vanished faster than gold, how entire holds of food were emptied in hours. Some chroniclers even admitted a grudging admiration for how pirates turned plunder into celebration. Food was their victory flag. The cook works quickly, mixing the grain with dried fruit and meat, then soaking it in wine. The smell deepens, rich and sharp. He hums while he stirs his tune, half law, half spell. The crew gathers close, passing cups of watered wine. Their laughter brittle but real. A curious detail from a Dutch court record mentions a pirate crew that once stole a merchant's entire cargo of goats and roasted them on a frozen beach. The witness said the smoke could be seen for miles and the sound of singing lasted until dawn. You can almost imagine it now, the madness of joy that comes when hunger finally loosens its grip. The cook calls for bowls. You take yours, still warm from the fire. The first bite feels almost unreal. The sweetness of figs and wine melts on your tongue, followed by salt, smoke and fat. You close your eyes around you. Men murmur softly, as if afraid to break the spell. Some experts on seafaring life argue that such feasts had a moral purpose beyond indulgence. They reminded crews of what they fought for, of why they endured the storms and the cold. Food became proof that survival meant more than just breathing. It meant tasting, remembering living. The captain drinks quietly at the back of the room. His eyes gleam in the firelight. "Let them eat," he says to no one in particular. "Tomorrow they'll need their strength again." You wonder if he knows how close he came to losing them all to despair. Tonight the ship feels alive again. The cook produces a final surprise, a small clay pot sealed with wax. He cracks it open and the scent of honey fills the air. "A gift from the gods," someone whispers. The cook dips his spoon and drizzles it over the bowls. The golden thread catches the firelight, turning the dull stew into something almost beautiful. You laugh softly, shaking your head. You've turned pirate food into poetry. You tell him. He smiles, eyes tired but bright. Every man deserves one poem before he dies. As the feast continues, someone starts singing a low tune that grows louder as others join in. It's not the chant of prayer or labor, but something freer, wilder. The rhythm matches the rocking of the ship, the beat of spoons on bowls, the pulse of life returning. There is an old proverb from the coast of Brittany: "A hungry man fears the sea, but a full one forgives it." Tonight you understand what it means. The waves outside no longer sound like threats but like applause, soft and endless. Later, when the food is gone and the wine reduced to its dregs, the men stretch out where they sit, smiling faintly in the half-light. The air hums with warmth, laughter, and a rare quiet. The cook leans against the wall, his eyes half closed. "If we die tomorrow," he murmurs, "at least we'll smell like kings." You walk out to the deck. The stars are brilliant now, reflected in the dark water below. The ship drifts slowly. No destination, no urgency. The scent of wine and roasted meat still clings to your clothes. You inhale deeply, savoring it. Historians who study the legends of the sea often speak of pirates as symbols of greed and chaos. But here, under this starlit sky, you know the truth is more fragile. It is not greed that drives them, but the memory of warmth, the desire for a moment that tastes like home. You sit by the railing, feeling the faint roll of the waves. The ship cars like an old animal resting after a long run. Somewhere behind you someone snores. The sound blends with the sea's low whisper, the last echo of the feast. You close your eyes, the taste of honey still lingering on your tongue. For the first time in a long while, you do not dream of hunger. By the next dawn, the warmth of the feast has faded into quiet exhaustion. The sea moves in slow, heaving breaths beneath the ship, and the light that filters through the clouds is gray again, dull and thin. The laughter that filled the galley last night has vanished, leaving behind only the creak of the hull and the faint whisper of ropes rubbing against wood. You feel heavier, not from food but from the return of reality. The men move sluggishly about their work. You watch as they coil ropes, patch sails and haul water, their faces drawn and distant. The sweetness of honey has already become a memory. The cook works silently now, cleaning the same pot he used for the feast. His hands tremble slightly, but he keeps them busy. Hunger will return soon. Everyone knows it. The cold always wins back what warmth gives away. You look out across the water and see how the ice is creeping closer again, pale sheets drifting together like slow, deliberate thoughts. There is an entry in a sailor's log from 1473 describing this exact moment, the one after abundance, when silence sets in. He wrote, "We ate as kings and woke as ghosts." You understand what he meant. The body may be fed, but the mind remains hollow for longer. The captain stands at the bow, his coat snapping softly in the wind. He says nothing, just stares toward the horizon. There's a stiffness in his posture, a weariness too proud to rest. You sense the same thing spreading through the crew, the fragile edge between relief and fear, between gratitude and guilt. A curious note in a collection of Baltic folklore tells of sailors who believed that happiness angered the sea. They would throw bits of food overboard after a feast to appease it, whispering apologies into the water. You see one of your crew mates doing that now, quietly dropping crumbs of bread into the waves. He does not notice that you are watching. The day passes slowly, the wind sharpens, cutting through your coat and biting your hands. The cook prepares a small midday meal, little more than boiled grain, and no one complains. After last night's luxury, this meager portion feels fitting, almost penitent. Some modern scholars think this rhythm of feast and famine shaped the psychology of seafaring men. Each high brought guilt, each hunger brought relief. It was a kind of emotional tide, rising and falling with every meal. Watching your crew mates now, you realize they are as bound to that rhythm as the ship is to the sea. As afternoon fades, the clouds deepen to iron gray. The captain gathers everyone on deck. "We'll ride this calm while we can." He says there's talk of ice ahead. His voice is firm, but his eyes look distant. He knows the cold better than any of you. The men nod, murmuring quietly. The sound of boots on wet planks fills the silence. Somewhere below the cook hums under his breath again, a soft tune that threads through the air like smoke. It sounds almost like morning. You lean on the rail staring into the shifting light. The sea has lost its sparkle. It looks heavier now, dark and thick. You feel the weight of it pressing against the ship, pressing against your chest. One of the older sailors joins you. His face is lined deeply, his beard full of frost. "Strange thing," he says quietly, "how a full belly makes you remember what you've lost." You ask what he means and he shrugs. "Every good meal reminds me of someone who didn't live to taste it." There is a pause before he speaks again. "We had a boy on my first ship," he says, "starved in the middle of a summer crossing. Plenty of food on board, but fever took his appetite. He smiled right before he died, said he dreamed of roast goose and cider." The man chuckles softly, a sound too tired to be bitter. Maybe that's the trick, dying full in your mind, if not your stomach. His words linger long after he walks away. You stare at the horizon until the sky dims to silver. The sea hums quietly, its rhythm slow and patient. Below deck, the cook serves the evening ration. The smell is faintly sour, but you eat it anyway. Each spoonful feels like a whisper of last night's feast. The men sit together but do not talk. The glow in their eyes has gone dull again. An old superstition recorded in a sailor's prayer book says that the sea takes back every gift it gives. It gives warmth, then frost, joy, then silence. Sitting here, now you begin to believe it. When night comes, the wind sharpens again. You pull your blanket around you and listen to the sounds of the ship. The waves tap gently at the hull, almost tender, almost cruel. You think of the feast, of the laughter, of the honey's sweetness fading from your tongue. It feels like a dream you once had and already half forgot. The cold slips back into your bones. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, the taste of salt still clinging to your lips. Somewhere in the dark the cook hums again, softer. Now his tune lost to the sea before it can reach the stars. The sea hardens overnight, its surface crusted with thin sheets of ice that scrape softly against the hull. You wake to the sound of cracking wood and the captain's low voice shouting orders above deck. The wind bites through every seam of your coat. As you climb up, the world around you gleaming pale blue under the dim light of dawn. You are close to land again, though calling it land feels generous. Ahead lies a cluster of rocks and frozen earth the color of ash. The captain's voice carries across the deck. "We anchor there," he says. "The currents are trapping us anyway." The ship lurches forward with a groan, grinding against ice, until it stops. The sound is deep and final. You realize what this means before anyone says it aloud: you are stranded. Accounts from winter voyages along the northern routes tell stories of ships marooned for months, the crews forced to survive on whatever they could find among the rocks and snow. Some never left, others became legends whispered in ports for centuries after. You can feel the weight of those ghosts already in the air. The men gather supplies into small piles. What remains of the flour? A few salted fish, a coil of rope, 2 working muskets and a single pot. The cook joins you clutching a knife and an expression you have never seen before, a calm acceptance edged with quiet fear. "We'll make do," he says simply. You step onto the shore with the others. The ice crunches beneath your boots, the wind stings your cheeks, every breath feels like glass in your lungs. The landscape stretches in every direction, barren but not lifeless. Here and there you see movement, a seal slipping into a crack in the ice, a cluster of birds picking at something unseen. The cook points. "That's food." He says, "There are stories recorded by explorers of the time about sailors boiling their belts or eating melted snow mixed with bone dust. Yet they also speak of ingenuity." You watch the cook carve a hollow in the snow to make a makeshift stove, line it with stones and light a small fire. He smiles faintly as the smoke rises. "If it burns we can live," he murmurs. Hours pass in quiet work. Some men collect driftwood and dried moss for fuel, others set traps near the rocks where small animals might move. You wade into the icy shallows, setting nets under the captain's instructions. Your fingers go numb almost instantly. You cannot feel where the rope ends and your skin begins by dusk. The traps have yielded little. A single fish, its body, stiff and glittering, lies beside the fire. The cook roasts it carefully, cutting it into small pieces to share. The meat is tender but faintly bitter from the smoke. You eat your portion slowly, trying to stretch the taste across your tongue. A strange entry in a Norse saga tells of stranded seafarers eating the hides of seals soaked in seawater, claiming the salt gave them strength. You look at the cook now, wondering if he has heard such stories too. He carves strips from a length of rope, dips them in the boiling pot and calls it rope stew. The crew laughs weakly, but they eat it anyway. Historians who study survival in maritime isolation note that the act of naming a meal, even a pitiful one, helps keep the mind from despair. A name turns necessity into something familiar, something almost human. You whisper the words rope stew under your breath as you swallow, pretending it means more than it does. The night deepens quickly, the cold closing in like a living thing. The wind wails through the rocks and the fire sputters low. You huddle close with the others, the snow beneath you freezing your boots solid. Someone begins to hum a tune, low and uneven. The sound barely carries, but it keeps the silence from swallowing you whole. One of the older men, his face gray with exhaustion, tells a story about a shipwreck he survived years ago. He claims they lived for weeks on seal fat and seaweed, drinking melted snow flavored with gunpowder to keep warm. The others chuckle softly, unsure if it is truth or delirium. Either way, it helps to listen. Before sleep, you glance toward the ship, a black shape frozen into the horizon. The lanterns still flicker faintly in its windows. It looks distant, already like a memory. The cook sits beside you rubbing his hands together. "Well managed," he says quietly. "Men always do until they don't." The fire hisses as the wind sweeps across the snow. You lie back and stare at the stars, bright and cold, above the dark world. The air tastes of ash and salt. The line between life and endurance feels thinner than ever. Yet as your eyes grow heavy, you feel something like peace. The earth beneath you is hard, unyielding, but real. For the first time in weeks, you are not moving, you close your eyes, the crackle of the dying fire whispering like a lullaby. The wind wakes you before the sun does. It howls through the broken planks of the ship, rattling what is left of the rigging. The air is colder than yesterday, sharp enough to sting your lungs when you breathe. The fire that burned through the night has collapsed into a faint ring of gray ash around it. The crew stirs slowly, their movements heavy, their silence deeper than exhaustion. You rise carefully, brushing snow from your coat. The cook is already on his feet, kneeling beside what remains of the fire, coaxing it back to life. His face is pale and hollow, his eyes dull from sleeplessness. He mutters something you do not catch and then glances at you. "Well, need more wood," he says. "If the storm worsens, we burn what we have left." By midday, the sky turns iron gray, the wind rising until it shrieks across the rocks. Snow begins to fall thick and fast, coating the world in silence. You can no longer see the ship out on the ice. The crew huddles around the fire, trading shifts to gather wood from the shoreline. The cold sinks into your bones, stealing thought, stealing time. Old chronicles of Arctic sailors speak of this same silence, a silence so complete that it breaks the mind. Hunger and frost feed on the same fear. When the food is gone, the body remembers warmth more vividly than taste. The surrounding men have stopped speaking, except when necessary. Every word costs energy. The last fish is eaten that night, divided evenly, each portion the size of a coin. The cook watches as the men chew, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow," he says softly, "we go farther inland." No one answers. There is a grim account preserved in the archives of Copenhagen describing a stranded crew who turned to boiling leather, then bark, then bone. When even that was gone, they began to look at one another differently. The record does not say what followed. Perhaps it did not need to. You wake the next morning to an emptiness that feels alive. The fire has died again, and the snow has buried what remains of the camp. The cook stands by the shoreline staring at something half coated by ice. It takes you a moment to see what it is, a body curled in the snow, one of the younger sailors gone quietly in the night. The captain kneels beside him, his breath clouding in the air. "He was too weak," he says. His voice is flat, stripped of anger. The others avert their eyes. No one says the word that sits heavy in every mind. Some surviving fragments from winter shipwrecks mention the long hunger, a stage when men stop feeling pain and start feeling clarity. They speak in calm tones, move deliberately and make choices they would never make under sun or summer. You recognize that stillness in your captain's face. The cook drags the body away from the fire. The snow muffles the sound. You turn your head, but the image lingers. Later, when he returns, he carries something wrapped in cloth. He does not speak, the men do not ask. The fire crackles weakly as night falls. A pot sits above it, steam curling into the frozen air. You tell yourself it is seal meat. You tell yourself you must eat to live. The smell is faintly sweet, metallic, unfamiliar. You close your eyes before you swallow. There is a sailor's prayer from the late 15th century that historians still debate its meaning. The final line reads, "Forgive the hunger that remembers your name." Some believe it was written for storms, others for moments like this. You murmur it under your breath as you eat, though you do not know if it is a prayer or an apology. When the pot is empty, no one speaks. The captain stares into the flames. The cook sits apart wiping his knife clean. The snow falls outside, steady and unending. The world has narrowed to this small circle of fire and breath. Later, as you lie awake, the wind howling above you, you think of stories told by the sea of ghost ships sailing with full crews that never spoke. Of bones that sang in the dark. Perhaps those tales began on nights like this, when men ate their fear to survive and left their humanity behind in the snow. You pull your coat tighter and close your eyes, pretending not to hear the soft sound of chewing that still echoes faintly in the dark. Morning breaks in slow, uncertain light. The storm has passed, but the world it leaves behind looks emptied of color. The sea is still frozen in patches, the snow crusted with a thin glaze of ice. You rise slowly, every joint aching and brush frost from your eyelashes. The fire has gone cold again, its ashes scattered by the wind. The cook stands by the shoreline watching the horizon. His breath comes in short, cloudy bursts. Behind him, the captain kneels near the last of the supplies. The sacks are nearly empty now. You can see the bottom of the barrel that once held flour, the cracked lid of the salt box, the greasy shadow where the oil used to be. The cook speaks without turning. "We can't stay here." His voice is quiet, but it carries in the still air. "There's no more to take from the island. We have to find people." The captain nods slowly. "There might be a port south of here." He says, "A small one." "I've heard rumors." Small ports and hidden markets dotted the coasts of medieval Europe, places where smugglers and fishermen traded away from royal taxes or the eyes of the church. Some were only caves with torches and crude tables. Others grew into entire underground towns thriving in secrecy. You know that if such a place still exists, it may be your only chance. The crew loads the boat again. What is left of it? The wood groans as it touches the frozen water. You push off from the shore, the ice cracking beneath you. The wind is sharp but not cruel, carrying a scent that feels faintly of smoke and tallow. Civilization must be close. Hours pass before you see it, a faint curl of gray rising from behind a cliff. Smoke, real and warm. The captain's eyes narrow, keep low. He says we don't know who they are. As you round the rocks, the sight appears slowly, a cluster of huts near the water's edge, their roofs thick with snow, their chimneys alive with smoke. Lanterns hang from poles casting small pools of light across the ice. Men in heavy coats move between the buildings carrying baskets, crates, barrels. You realize it is not village, it is a market. A document found in the archives of Bruce describes such places as shadow ports where pirates, smugglers and desperate traders met. When the seas froze, they sold whatever they could steal or salvage, barrels of grain, dried fish, cured hides, even stolen candles from church stores. The line between sinner and merchant blurred in the cold. You pull the boat closer to shore. A man wrapped in a fur cloak approaches, his beard white with frost. His eyes study you all carefully. Then he nods once. You've come far. He says, coin or trade? The captain answers simply, trade. He gestures toward the supplies, a few bolts of cloth, the remains of a silver chain and one small pouch of pepper that the cook has guarded since the raid. The man studies the items, then calls to another figure inside the hut. Moments later, a woman appears carrying baskets. Inside are bread, dried fish and small cakes of lard wrapped in paper. The sight makes your heart ache. The trade happens without ceremony. The man weighs the pouch of pepper in his palm, his expression unreadable, then nods fair. He pushes the baskets toward you. You'll need warmth more than gold. Records from similar markets mention how certain traders took pity on starving crews while others preyed on them. Historians still debate whether these places were acts of mercy or greed. Watching this exchange, you feel both truths at once. The cook kneels beside the baskets, touching each item as though confirming it is real. He lifts a piece of bread to his nose, inhales deeply and then hands it to you. First eat, he says softly. You found the smoke. You take a bite, the crust rough against your teeth and the taste floods your senses. It is coarse and heavy, but alive. You look around and notice other men arriving in small boats, faces wrapped, hands trembling. All of them drawn by hunger. All of them carrying something to trade. The market hums with quiet desperation, a place built entirely on need. As the sun begins to set, the trader's wife hands the cook a small jar from my own fire, she says, for your strength inside is rendered fat. Smooth and pale. He nods his thanks, eyes shining. When you return to the ship, the air feels warmer, though the temperature has not changed. The fire burns bright again, the smell of lard and bread rising through the galley. The men eat in silence. No songs, no jokes, only gratitude that feels too large for words. An old poem written by an anonymous sailor speaks of this kind of place. In the dark of winter, mercy wears a mask and trade becomes prayer. You repeat the line quietly to yourself as you finish your meal. Later you step out onto the deck. The stars shimmer faintly through the haze. Somewhere far behind you, that hidden port still burns its fires, a small pocket of light in a world made of cold. You imagine the traders cleaning their tables, counting coins, whispering prayers for the next ship that will surely come. You stand there for a long time, the taste of bread still on your tongue. The sea groans softly beneath you, carrying your ship back into the dark. But for the first time in weeks you no longer feel afraid of what waits ahead. The fire burns low in the galley. A steady orange pulse against the walls. The air smells of salt, lard and something faintly sweet. The crew moves quietly, each man wrapped in his own thoughts. Outside, the sea groans under its skin of ice. You sit near the cook, holding a tin cup of liquid that shines like syrup in the lamplight. Rum, he says, handing you another splash. Frozen solid. When I found it took half an hour to thaw. You raise it to your lips and taste the burn. It hits like heat and smoke together, spreading down your throat until your chest aches. The others sip in silence each swallow, breaking the cold from the inside out. For a moment you feel human again. In the journals of captured pirates, rum appears again and again, not just as drink but as ritual. It was medicine, currency, comfort and courage. They called it liquid fire, a name that fit too well. Sailors drank it to numb the cold, to dull the hunger, to forget what they could not change. You understand now why it was guarded more fiercely than gold. The cook pours himself a small portion and raises the cup to the living. He says softly. The men echo him, their voices low and rough. The sound fades into the creak of the hull, the steady heartbeat of the ship. An English privateer once wrote that rum could trick a man into warmth long after his body had stopped feeling it. He claimed it made him dream of summer, even in snow. You wonder if that illusion is mercy or cruelty. As the heat spreads, you feel your mind loosen, your thoughts floating free of the cold. The captain joins the circle, his steps slow but steady. He drinks without expression, then wipes his mouth with the back of his glove. "Keep your heads," he says quietly. Rum gives warmth, but it steals sense just as quick. The men nod, though a few are already smiling more freely than they should. One curious note found in a medical treatise from the early 1500s claims that diluted rum mixed with lemon peel was prescribed for frostbite and despair alike. The author called it a drink of courage disguised as a cure. You think about that. As the cook adds more peel to the pot, stirring slowly, the scent rises, sharp and bright, cutting through the gloom. A few of the younger sailors begin to hum a tune, their voices unsteady but warm. The melody drifts through the air, wrapping itself around the fire. You lean back, eyes half closed, the world softening at the edges. Historians who study maritime culture often debate whether drinking helped or harmed sailors in the long winters. Some say it was escape, others call it endurance. The truth lies somewhere between the two. Rum could be poison or salvation, depending on how much you needed to forget. The cook refills the cups once more, though the rum is nearly gone. "Last of it," he says, "drink slow." You take another sip. The warmth feels different this time, gentler. It fills your chest like memory rather than fire. A sailor across the table laughs quietly, his eyes glassy. "Funny thing," he says. "This stuff doesn't warm the body, it just convinces the soul that the body's fine." Everyone chuckles softly, but the sound fades quickly. No one wants to think too much about the truth in his words. As the fire dwindles, you stare into the glowing coals. The red light flickers like tiny suns, reflecting in the rum still clinging to your cup. The smell of smoke mixes with sweetness and salt. You take another small sip, holding it in your mouth until the taste almost burns. A forgotten line in a sailor's song comes to you then: "Rum for the bones, wind for the soul and mercy for the morning." You whisper it without thinking. The cook looks at you and nods slowly, as if the words are older than either of you. Outside, the wind rises again, brushing the ship with long sighing breaths. The waves lap gently against the hull, and somewhere below, ice cracks with a sound like distant thunder. You listen, half dreaming the rum humming in your veins. Before the crew drifts off, the captain gives a quiet order: "Keep the fire burning. No one sleeps cold tonight." The cook nods and throws another handful of wood into the flames. The light grows brighter for a moment, painting the walls gold. You curl up in your blanket, still tasting the last drop of rum on your tongue. The ship cars softly, rocking with the rhythm of the sea. The warmth that fills you now feels almost real, and even if it is only borrowed, it is enough. The fire hums, the men breathe, and the ocean sings a low, endless note beneath it all. You close your eyes, letting the false warmth carry you into dreams where the water is calm and the night never ends. The night has slipped away quietly, leaving a sky of dull gray and a sea that whispers instead of roars. You wake to the faint strumming of a stringed instrument, something rough and handmade, the sound fragile but real. When you open your eyes, you see the youngest sailor sitting near the galley fire, plucking at a lute, with fingers cracked from cold. The tune is soft, lilting, almost mournful. The cook stands nearby smiling faintly as he stirs the morning broth. The smell of bread and smoke lingers in the air. For a moment it feels almost like home, though the deck still groans with ice and the wind still bites through your coat. People always think pirates lived only for gold, for blood, for the next raid. But hunger and could teach a different truth. What really keeps a crew alive is distraction. Music, stories, laughter. Even a lie told well can keep a man breathing for another day. You sip your cup of warm liquid and listen to the tune. It wavers, then steadies, becoming something closer to a dance. The others begin to tap their bowls with spoons, the dull rhythm filling the space. The sound echoes up into the rigging and across the empty sea. One note in an English surgeon's diary describes how ships trapped in winter ice would often hold mock feasts. The men would sit around empty plates, singing and describing imaginary meals in lavish detail. It was part humor, part prayer. You can almost hear the same game starting now. The cook grins. Suddenly tonight, he says loudly, we dine like nobles roast, pheasant with almonds, sweet pies, apples soaked in honey. The men laugh. One replies, don't forget the wine. The captain insists on the best vintage. Another adds, and cream enough to drown in. The galley fills with laughter, shaky but alive. A small note from a Venetian ship's log mentions that sailors sometimes performed mock banquets, not just to pass time but to keep their jaws and tongues active. During long hunger. The mind, it turns out, feeds the body more than you would think. The captain appears at the doorway, arms crossed, watching. If anyone finds a real apple, he says, I'll trade him my hat. That earns another round of laughter, louder this time. The sound feels new, unfamiliar after so many weeks of silence. The young sailor begins a song, an old one, about a fisherman who tricked death by pretending to be full. His voice is thin but clear. You hum along before realizing. You know the tune, the melody winds around, the clatter of spoons, the hiss of the fire, the slow pulse of the waves. According to a scholar who studied maritime folklore, many sea songs were not written for work or prayer, but for survival. They were ways of breathing together, reminders that the crew was one body, not many. As you listen, you understand. The rhythm of the song feels like a heartbeat shared among all of you. The cook joins in banging a pot lid as a drum. The sound echoes through the ship. Someone whistles off-key, another stamps his foot, and for a few shining minutes the cold loses its hold. The ship becomes warm again, alive again. When the song ends, there is laughter, then quiet. The cook ladles out the last of the broth and says softly, it's not pheasant, but it'll do. You take your portion, still smiling. The warmth of the soup and the music together feels like armor. There is an old superstition written in the margins of a sailor's book, sing before you sleep and hunger will pass you by. The words come to mind as you lean against the wall listening to the crackle of the fire. You wonder who first said them and whether they believed them. Later, that night, the crew gathers again, this time without instruments or spoons. They sit close, trading stories. Some tell jokes from home, others recall battles and storms. One man recites a poem about the sea swallowing kings and beggars alike. The rhythm of his voice fills the silence. A modern historian once called these stories oral rations. They fed the mind when the body had nothing left. You think of that phrase now and realize how right it feels. The laughter, the singing, the shared lies, they are all food of a kind. When the fire dies, no one rushes to their hammocks. The quiet that follows feels softer, peaceful. You stare into the glowing coals and feel warmth that comes not from flame but from the voices still echoing faintly in your ears. Outside, the sea murmurs gently, its tone less cruel. You lie back, eyes heavy, the rhythm of the song still humming in your chest. The last thought before sleep comes easily. Hunger may take the body, but music guards the soul. The morning begins quietly, with a light mist rolling over the sea. The ship drifts on slow waves, the ropes creaking as though whispering to one another. You wake to find the air warmer, not by much, but enough that the frost on the rail has softened into beads of water. The cold is easing, if only for a moment. The cook is already awake. Crouched beside the fire, he measures what remains of the provisions, his lips moving silently as he counts. There is no despair in his face this time, only calculation. He catches your eye and smiles faintly. We've learned the rhythm of this winter, he says. Now we must learn to plan for the next. It sounds absurd at first to think of next winter while barely surviving this one. But his tone is steady. It reminds you of something deeper than optimism. It is endurance. Records from northern fleets describe how sailors began rationing more cleverly after surviving one brutal winter. They dried herbs along the rigging, sealed fish in oil, even stored seawater in barrels to evaporate later for salt. Necessity turned them into engineers. Watching the cook, now you see the same transformation. He begins to teach the others what he has learned. The small garden boxes are still alive, their green shoots trembling in the breeze. We dry half, eat half, he says. If they can live through the cold, so can we. The men listen, their expressions somewhere between disbelief and admiration. One sailor brings up the idea of sewing small sacks for dried seaweed and onion. Another suggests storing snow in covered barrels to melt later for drinking water. Each idea builds on the last small pieces of wisdom, shaping something larger. For the first time in months, you feel like the ship is thinking again. An early 15th century journal written by a merchant sailor records a similar shift in tone. We ceased to wait for mercy and began to make it. He wrote. His crew survived the next winter better than the first. You think of that line now. How mercy can be built, one clever habit at a time. The cook begins setting new routines. Every morning one man scrapes frost from the deck to melt for washing, another tends to the plants, 2 others check the ropes for salt damage and tie nets where fish might pass. When the water clears, the captain approves quietly, though you catch the ghost of pride in his eyes. The ship feels more like a village than a vessel. Now each man knows his small duty and the work fills the hours that hunger used to claim. You notice that no one complains anymore. There is no energy for despair, only movement. A curious note from a Scandinavian chronicle mentions that after the worst winters pirate crews often became surprisingly orderly. They rationed fairly, repaired their ships carefully and even kept written records of supplies. The chronicler wrote that hardship turned chaos into discipline faster than any law could. Watching your own crew, you understand that completely. At noon the cook boils a small pot of broth made from dried seaweed and salt. The flavor is thin, but he adds a pinch of something new, powdered bark ground fine between 2 stones. It gives the soup a faint sweetness and the men eat in silence, satisfied. You smile when you realize he is still experimenting, still searching for better ways to feed life itself. The captain gathers everyone on deck. That evening the sea glows with reflected light, the sky a pale gold fading to silver. He speaks quietly, almost as if to himself. When the ice breaks he says, we sail south again, but this time we'll be ready. We'll carry spring with us. His words ripple through the crew like warmth. The idea of spring feels foreign, distant, but it takes hold. You picture the garden boxes overflowing with green, the air smelling of pine and wet soil, the taste of something fresh on your tongue. Some modern historians argue that survival during maritime winters depended less on resources and more on mindset. The crews that planned ahead, that found rhythm and order amid chaos, were the ones who lived. You feel that truth in every careful movement around you. The cook leans close and says softly, if we last long enough, this ship will remember what we've done, every plank soaked in our patience. You believe him. Memory lives in more than people. It seeps into wood, into salt, into stories carried by the tide. As night falls, you sit near the garden boxes watching the little leaves quiver in the wind. The air smells faintly of seaweed and smoke, but beneath it is something new, a hint of life pushing back against the cold. You close your eyes and listen to the sound of the sea breathing around the hull. The rhythm feels different, now no longer a threat but a companion. The ship rocks gently, and you think of the word the cook used earlier, rhythm. It feels right. Survival has become its own kind of song. The wind hums softly through the rigging. You draw your blanket close, feeling the pulse of the waves beneath you, the stars glint above sharp and countless, and for the first time in months you let yourself believe that spring might actually come. The wind shifts again that night, carrying with it the faint scent of shoring earth. You wake to the sound of dripping water, slow, rhythmic, persistent. The ice that has held the ship captive for months is finally beginning to soften. The sound feels like a heartbeat returning to the world. The cook is already on deck, his hands cupped around a tin mug of steam. He looks up and smiles when he sees you listen. He says softly, "You do." The steady drip becomes a song, uneven but hopeful. The sea is learning to move again. In journals of early northern explorers, this moment is always described the same way: the first melt, the sound of the ocean remembering itself. Men cried openly, laughed or stood silent, afraid that if they celebrated too loudly, the sea might freeze again out of spite. You understand the feeling. Now. The captain orders, the sails checked, the ropes mended. "Well, be ready when the ice breaks," he says. His voice sounds steadier, though weariness still hides beneath it. The men move with quiet energy, their breath fogging in the air. It is the first time in months you've seen them smile without effort. The cook prepares breakfast, thin porridge flavored with the last dried greens from the garden boxes. The smell is faintly sweet, carrying a memory of life, a farewell meal for winter, he says, and the men laugh softly. You sit with your bowl, the warmth seeping into your hands, the taste reminding you of the land you have not seen in so long. A curious record found in a Hanseatic merchant's journal mentions that crews celebrated the thaw by tossing bits of bread into the sea as an offering. They called it the sea's share. The cook does the same now, tearing a small piece from a loaf and casting it overboard for her patience, he says. By midday the sound of cracking ice echoes all around the ship. Huge sheets drift apart, the water beneath them dark and alive. The crew cheers, voices roar and loud. You can feel the ship breathe again, shifting with the current. For a moment you imagine the sea herself waking, stretching after a long cold sleep. The cook sets a small pot on the fire and pours in snow melt. He adds salt seaweed and a scrap of dried meat, a soup for new beginnings, he murmurs. The scent drifts through the air, mingling with the smell of brine and thaw. Historians still debate whether these small ceremonies held real religious meaning or were simply acts of relief. But out here, where faith and hunger are the same language, the difference hardly matters. You see belief in every movement of the crew, in the way they touch the wood of the ship, in how they whisper. Thanks to the wind, as the ice breaks fully, the ship begins to drift south, the sails snapping weakly in the wind. The captain stands at the helm, his face turned toward the faint sunlight. His expression is calm, but his hands grip the wheel tightly. The cook joins him for a moment, saying nothing. The two men stand side by side, listening to the creak and sigh of the sea. A note from a 16th-century traveler describes how men who survived brutal winters often carried a superstition with them afterward, never to eat their first spring meal. In silence. They believed silence invited the cold back. Tonight the crew will not be silent. The cook works for hours, turning every scrap of food into something that feels like celebration. He sprinkles the last of the pepper, boils the remaining seaweed with snow melt until it glows faintly green, and even roasts small pieces of hardtack until they crackle. The air smells alive again. When the meal is ready, the men gather close around the fire. The captain lifts his bowl first. To survival, he says simply. The others echo him, voices rough but steady. The cook smiles, his hands trembling as he lifts his own bowl. To tomorrow, he adds, the first sip burns with salt and smoke. It tastes of the sea, of patience, of everything you have endured. The warmth spreads through your chest, carrying something heavier than hunger but lighter than fear. Later, as the light fades, you stand by the railing. The water ripples freely, now dark, blue and endless. The stars begin to appear scattered like seeds across the sky. For the first time in what feels like years, the world moves easily again. You hear the cook humming behind you, his voice soft and low. The melody is unfamiliar, but its rhythm matches the motion of the sea. You close your eyes and listen, letting the sound blend with the whisper of waves against the hull. An old verse comes to you, though you cannot remember where you heard it. When the ice forgets its name, the sea forgives the hunger. You repeat it quietly, the words warm against the cold air. The night deepens, but it no longer feels endless. You can smell salt, hear water moving beneath the ship, feel the wind carrying life again. The sea has remembered its song, and for now you drift within it, alive and listening. The morning light spreads slowly, a pale shimmer sliding over the restless water. The air feels damp but not cruel anymore, and the faint hum of Thor fills the silence like a heartbeat. You rise from your hammock and walk to the deck, feeling the ship tilt gently beneath your feet. The sea is moving again, no longer a prison of ice but a shifting path of gray and silver. The cook is at the railing holding a bucket tied with rope. He lowers it into the water, hauls it up and grins when he sees small flickers of movement inside fish. He says quietly, "The sea remembers how to feed us." The words sound almost reverent. Fish are not just food now, they are a miracle. The crew gathers around watching as the cook tips the catch into a barrel. The sound of scales against wood echoes softly, and for a moment everyone is smiling. Hunger has lost its teeth for the first time in months. In the records of medieval fishing vessels this moment appears again and again. Sailors wrote of how, when the ice melted, the fish returned like a promise kept. They called it the sea's forgiveness. You can feel that forgiveness now, gentle and absolute. The cook works quickly, cleaning the fish and setting some aside to dry in salt. He lowers the rest into a pot of boiling water, adding a few pinches of herbs from the small garden boxes. The smell that rises is sharp and alive, carrying through the ship like sunlight made into scent. One sailor hums while the soup cooks, a rhythm that matches the sound of water against the hull. The others join softly, their voices blending into something that feels like gratitude. A fragment from a Norse ballad speaks of this very act. When the first fish sings in the pot, the sea forgives the winter. You whisper the line under your breath, half prayer, half memory. When the meal is ready, the cook serves it in small wooden bowls. The broth glows faintly, the surface slick with oil. You lift a spoonful to your lips. The taste is clean, rich and bright, almost shockingly alive after so long, with dull flavors. You swallow and feel warmth spread through you, a warmth deeper than any fire. The captain takes his bowl last. He eats in silence, then sets it down and looks out over the horizon. "We're moving south again," he says. "We follow the Thor." The men nod already, readying the sails, their movements smoother, lighter. Hope is a kind of fuel. Some chroniclers claim that crews who survived brutal winters always spoke softer afterward, as if the cold had taught them reverence. You feel that same quiet settling over everyone. Now even laughter seems gentler. The cook finishes eating and begins cleaning his tools. You watch him for a moment before asking what he'll do with the dried fish. He smiles faintly. "Save it," he says. "We owe the next storm a favor." His voice is calm, but you can tell he believes it. Later that afternoon the water grows calmer. A few seabirds circle overhead, their calls sharp and hopeful. The air smells cleaner, as though the whole world has been washed. The crew works together in silence, patching sails, checking ropes, repairing cracks in the deck. Every small task feels sacred now. An old maritime note from a Spanish port describes this transformation perfectly. After the Thor, every sound aboard becomes music, every action becomes prayer. You can hear it now, the thud of boots, the creak of wood, the flutter of sails, all woven into a living rhythm. The cook stands near the stern watching the waves. His face is tired but peaceful. "When we reach land," he says, "I'll plant something real, not in boxes, not on boards, something that can stay." You nod, picturing it, green fields instead of gray waves, roots instead of ropes. The sky begins to darken as the sun sinks low. The air is warm enough that no one hides below deck tonight. The men sit together, their shoulders brushing their breath visible in the dim light. Someone begins to tell a story about a storm that swallowed a fleet and returned only one man, who claimed the sea had spoken to him in song. The others listen quietly, eyes fixed on the horizon. The cook hums again the same melody as before. The captain closes his eyes, tapping the rhythm on his knee. You feel it too, the strange, fragile calm that comes not from victory but from endurance. When night settles fully, the stars appear clear and sharp above the water. The ship glides softly through the waves, no longer fighting, simply moving. You breathe deeply, tasting salt and smoke and something new, freedom. There is a saying written in an old sailor's notebook found in a shipwreck. Centuries later, the sea never forgets who loved her enough to survive her. You repeat the words quietly to yourself as the ship drifts south. You look one last time at the cook, his face lit by the fire's glow. He stirs the pot though it is already empty, as if he simply likes the sound. You smile, close your eyes and let the rhythm of the sea cradle you. The Thor has come and the story is not over yet. The sea breathes softly tonight, a calm rhythm. Against the side of the ship. The air is warmer, the sky sure with faint pink. You stand near the bow, feeling the slow rise and fall beneath your feet. It is strange to realize how quiet hunger has become, how far away the cold now feels. The ship hums with quiet work, sails, trimmed ropes, coiled voices, calm. The cook is below deck preparing what might be the last of the preserved fish. You follow the scent, a gentle mix of salt, smoke and herbs. When you reach the galley, he greets you with a smile that carries something close to pride. "We've done it," he says. "We've outlived the winter." His words hang in the air for a moment. They feel heavier than joy, lighter than disbelief. You sit beside the small fire, watching the pot simmer. The sound of bubbling water fills the silence, steady and comforting. In one of the oldest known travel diaries, written by a sailor returning from Iceland, there is a passage about this same feeling. He wrote that when the first warmth returned, his crew laughed and wept together, not because they were safe but because they had become part of the sea itself. You think you understand now what he meant. The cook ladles the soup into bowls, his hands steady. He adds a few green leaves from the tiny plants that survived in their boxes, then sets your bowl in front of you. The taste is soft, simple, familiar. The salt no longer burns your tongue. It feels like memory around you. The men eat slowly, savoring every bite as if it might be their last. Some close their eyes as they chew, others whisper, "Thanks." There is no laughter this time, only quiet satisfaction. The captain stands near the door watching the scene with a small, tired smile. An old record from a monastery near the Breton coast tells of sailors who, after surviving long winters at sea, would make a vow of silence for 3 days when they returned to shore. They said words were too small for gratitude. You wonder if you'll feel that same urge when your feet touch land again. After the meal, the cook cleans his tools, careful and deliberate. "We'll have enough dried fish to reach the next port," he says, "maybe even enough to trade." His eyes gleam in the firelight. The man who once scraped mold from barrels now speaks of trade as if he's rediscovered the language of the living. Some researchers who study maritime psychology suggest that the hardest part of survival is not the suffering itself, but what comes after the silence that follows endurance. The human mind, they say, has trouble believing in peace. You feel that unease now, quiet but real. The captain calls everyone to the deck. At sunset, the horizon burns with gold, the waves glinting like hammered copper. He says nothing for a while, only looks at the water. Finally, he speaks, "Well, make for land tomorrow. Maybe we'll find a village, maybe not, but we'll sail until we do." The men nod, the wind tugging softly at their coats. The cook sets his hand on the railing and whispers something that sounds like a blessing. His words are carried off by the sea before you can catch them. A small, strange moment happens then. A single bird lands on the mast, shaking out its feathers. It looks out toward the horizon and cries once, a sound so sharp and clear that every man on deck falls silent. The cook smiles. "Spring's messenger," he says. "She's telling us we've been forgiven." You stay there until the sky deepens to violet. The first stars shimmer overhead, faint and trembling. The sea glows faintly in their reflection. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that tastes of salt and promise. Historians still write about the resilience of seafarers, how they endured storms and famine with courage beyond understanding. But they rarely speak of this moment, the quiet after the struggle, when life feels both too big and too fragile to touch. You close your eyes and let the sound of the waves settle around you. The ship rocks gently, the wood warms beneath your palms. The cook's laughter drifts from below deck, soft and genuine. For the first time since this voyage began, you let yourself believe in tomorrow without fear. The wind sighs, steady and kind, somewhere ahead, unseen. But certain land waits. The next morning rises, clear and golden. The sun touches the sea like fire on glass and the light dances over the deck in ripples of warmth. The crew wakes slowly, blinking against the brightness. You climb to the rail and look out over the horizon, and there it is at last, a dark line against the pale sky, land. No one speaks. At first, the moment feels too sacred for words. Then, as the wind catches the sails, a low murmur passes through the men, a sound between disbelief and joy. The cook steps beside you, eyes fixed on that dark line. "Bread and soil," he whispers, "real food, real ground." His voice trembles with awe. In the journals of returning sailors this scene appears again and again, the first glimpse of land after endless sea. Some wrote that they cried without meaning to. Others swore they could smell the grass miles before reaching it. You understand why every sense in your body leans toward that horizon, hungry not for food but for belonging. The captain stands at the helm, steady and silent. His face is unreadable, but his hands shake slightly. On the wheel, the wind fills the sails and the ship glides forward with a grace it has not known in months. You can feel the hum of life returning through every plank. The cook moves to the galley one last time. He lights the fire, though it is hardly needed, and boils a small pot of water from a hidden pocket. He pulls the final handful of herbs, the last green things that survived the winter. "For the journey's end," he says. The scent rises bright and clean. A curious note from a 16th-century log book mentions that sailors always brewed tea or broth before setting foot on land again. They called it the taste between worlds. It marked the transition from survival to living. The cook hands you a cup. You drink slowly, the warmth spreading through you like sunlight under your skin. As the ship draws closer to shore, the details of the land begin to take shape: low hills, dark forests, and a thin strand of sand. You can hear birds calling faintly in the distance. The sound pierces your chest with something like gratitude. Historians often describe this moment as rebirth, they say. The sea takes everything from a man's strength, pride, even his sense of time, and then gives it back in fragments when he survives. You feel that truth now in your bones, in your breath. The ship runs around softly, the wood sighing as it meets earth. The men move slowly, as if afraid the ground might vanish if they step too hard. The captain orders. The anchor dropped, his voice steady again. Then he looks at the cook. "You first," he says. "You kept us alive." The cook hesitates, then steps down onto the sand. He kneels and presses his hands into the earth, his eyes closing. "Warm," he says almost in disbelief. The others follow, laughter bubbling up through exhaustion. Some kneel, some shout, some simply lie down. You stand still for a moment, the wind wrapping around you like an embrace. A fragment of poetry from a forgotten sailor speaks of this feeling: to eat the air of land after salt is to be born again. You breathe deeply and it feels true. The air smells of pine and soil, not smoke and brine. The cook begins unpacking small things, a pot, a knife, a scrap of cloth. He finds a patch of flat ground and plants the last remaining seeds from the ship's garden box. For the next hungry soul who lands here, he says quietly, may the earth remember us. Kindly. You help him cover the soil, patting it down gently. The sky above seems endless now. No longer something to fight but something to rest beneath. The others gather driftwood and start a fire. Soon the smell of roasting fish drifts through the air again, but this time it smells like celebration, not survival. The captain sits apart staring at the horizon. After a while he speaks softly, almost to himself. The sea took everything it wanted, he says, and still it left us. You sit beside the cook as the fire crackles. He hands you the first piece of fish, perfectly crisp at the edges. You take a bite, it tastes of smoke, salt and peace around you. The men eat in silence, their faces lit by the glow of flame and dawn. When the meal is done, the cook leans back and closes his eyes. We made it, he murmurs. That's all a story ever really needs. The captain nods once. A story worth remembering, he says. And as the sun climbs higher, the sea gleams behind you, endless and patient. The waves lap gently at the sand. Not angry, not hungry, simply breathing. You feel the rhythm of it, settle inside you the pulse that carried you through every storm. You know that someday, when someone asks what pirates truly ate to survive the brutal winters, the truth will sound simple: salt and faith, hunger and luck. But you will remember the taste of warmth after the thaw, the sweetness of survival, the quiet of a full heart and the sound of water forgiving the shore. You close your eyes, the world steady beneath you, the sea whispering softly in the distance. The journey has ended, but its memory breathes on, carried by the wind and the waves where hunger once lived and peace now sleeps. Now the story softens, the edges fading into quiet. You sit with the image of that fire still glowing against the sand, the sound of the waves, no longer cruel but kind. The world around you slows, the light melting into gold. Breathe in once deeply. The air is gentle now. No more frost, no more hunger, just the steady rhythm of the tide and the faint hiss of foam curling over the shore. The cook is there somewhere, still humming softly as he tends the small green shoots he planted. The captain's shadow stretches long against the sand. Everything feels calm. Let the sound of the sea fill the surrounding space. Picture the water rolling in and out, washing the last traces of hardship away. Each wave carries a little warmth, a little sleep. The sky dims, the horizon softens and the world seems to hold its breath with you. You can almost taste the salt in the air, the kind that no longer stings but soothes. You can feel the ground beneath you, firm and forgiving, holding you up gently. The ship rests quietly nearby. Her sails slack, her purpose fulfilled. She cars like an old lullaby. Now your eyes grow heavy. The wind hushes, the fire flickers low, the sea murmurs. One last promise that tomorrow will come gentle and bright and hunger will be only a story. Sleep now, traveler of tides. You are warm, you are full, the ocean is calm.